I welcome all of you to the second day of the webinar series hosted by VS College of Architecture, titled Exploring Design Thinking. This event is a part of VESCOAconverse series. We have with us our expert speakers for the day, faculty members, architects, and students, and I welcome all of you. Before we start the event, as a part of VS tradition, I would request everyone to join me in chanting Om 3 times. Thank you. Yesterday, we had two expert speakers with us, architect Urmila Rajadhyaksh and architect Naresh Shah, who elaborated upon the pre-design process. Architect Rajadhyaksh shed light upon the dynamic and evolving nature of sites and put forth a set of questions that would guide a designer to understand the processes that take place on site. Architect Naresh Shah highlighted the importance of pre-design and presented a detailed methodology for the pre-design process. The presentations were very enriching, and what followed was a very engaging and interesting question and answer session. Today, we have with us two more expert speakers who would be throwing light on different aspects of the design process, architect Amit Arya and architect Chitra Vishwanath. On behalf of VESCO, I warmly welcome the speakers today. With this, I would like to invite the moderator of the session, Associate Professor Mandar Dhuri, to take over and continue with the proceedings of the day. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Am I audible, all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So a nice platform to, in the early morning, to start debating on various issues. I have always maintained this approach that architecture is actually a way of life. So anything that comes along in the way of life is always welcome, and we can always connect as architects to things which are comprising of life. So, because we are discussing architecture as way of life, there is something very interesting that I would like to bring to our notice here, and then allow that to connect to our expert architect speaker that we have today with us, Amit Arya. Before that, I would just like to bring to our notice that the first thing that we learn as infants, or the first thing that we learn as a life which is wanting to connect to the outside world, is some kind of sound. We create sound, we relate to sound, and then that sound takes a form of a syllable, then it goes into becoming a word, then it goes on to becoming a sentence, and then so on and so forth. So the whole crux of communication is coming from the idea of sound, and that's how we start connecting to things around us in this world. Now, when we look at it from an architect's perspective, an architect starts looking at spaces not only as light and shadow, but also as sounds, also as various kinds of experiences and various kinds of associations that we make. Some of them go into our memory, they stay back with us as memories. Some of them start becoming a little bit more intimate and personal to us. Some of these memories become hazy as we grow out of them. Some of the memories come back and connect back some realizations to us about a place, about people, and so on. So it's all about association. So it's very interesting to see how life around us, is it actually representing something? Is this life representing something, or is that life symbolic of things which are around us? And in the studios also, we have been entertaining this idea of symbol and representation. How a symbol is connected to what is the idea of representation, and how representation is springing out from the meaning of symbol. Is representation a good thing to do, or is it just a symbolic image of something? So is it springing from the overall spirit of life, or is it just coming from a mirror kind of an idea of something which is the meaning of life? So these are questions which are there, which all of us have in the second year and the third year. And we thought it will be interesting to have someone who has an understanding, a deeper kind of a passionate understanding, to understand life from the perspective of how do you express, how do you communicate, and what is it that you represent. and more so, also how do you do that from an architect's perspective? So allow me to introduce. So it's better that the expert comes up and takes this space and opens up the discussion. Allow me to introduce architect Amit Arya. So I'll request our panel to have the poster up. For those who don't know architect Amit Arya, so if you can have the event poster up. Yeah, architect Amit Arya. Amit Arya was born in Mumbai, India. He has studied architecture at the University of Mumbai at the Paika, which is Pillai's College of Architecture in Panvel, and at Cornell University in New York. He has been a practicing architect for over 15 years with experience spanning architecture, urban design in landscape and public realm of design as well. His work features a very broad range of scales and typologies, which include educational, commercial, residential, and hospitality projects. He's part of the design leadership group at the Perkins Eastman and participates regularly in discussions on the creative process. He's also a regular writer, is part of the editorial board of the international magazine My Livable City, for which he has contributed numerous articles on a range of subjects pertaining to this discipline. So allow me to introduce to you architect Amit Arya. Can we have you on mic, please? May I request architect Amit Arya to join?
Hi,
you can open audio. Yeah. Hello. Good morning, Amit.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good morning.
Yes. Yes. Good morning. Good morning. So,
thank you for the kind words on that.
So from 12 hours far away, we're trying to connect and we're trying to see how does the session opens with your insights. So over to you, Amit.
Sure. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for taking our time to listen to me. I'm very happy to be here on this platform. First for me, in terms of presenting digitally about ideas on architecture. I would like to start by thanking, most importantly, three people: Mandar, Anandachari, and Kiran Kiluskar. It was the brainchild of these three people that I'm there in front of you today, and talking about a subject which is very close to what I do every single day. The title of my talk today is The Medium of Communication in Architecture, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at least for the next 40-45 minutes, talk about this very passionate subject of drawing and communicating, and trying to find out what it takes in the discipline of architecture to put an idea forward convincingly, right? I don't promise I'll be able to solve or even address all of our questions that come in today, or the broad range of talk that can be ensued on this subject. And but what I'll try to do is quickly touch upon a broader base, which according to me, in my mind, constitutes the idea of the talk. Abhijit, if you could share the slides, because I can't see the slide deck right now. So we're going to talk about medium of communication in architecture. I have set up the presentation in three parts. Part one will talk about ideation, the whole concept of how do you establish tools and methods with which you can explore the construction of an idea, the evolution of an idea, the beginnings of an idea. We'll go through the entire set of toolkits that have been established over thousands of years. You know, these are not new ways of investigating nascent ideas, but they've been evolving over a period of time. So I try to identify what they used to be and what they have evolved to become. Chapter 2, or the section 2, will talk about representation of that very idea. So you learn a language, you learn the alphabets, you learn how to construct a sentence, but how do you use all of that, the grammar and the syntax, to actually tell a story? So section 2 will talk about that, and it'll also have a second part to it on technical documentation, because in my mind, and a lot of other people would agree, is that technical documentation is an aspect of architecture, a very crucial one, which sort of is its own animal. It has its own ways of working. It has its own developed vocabulary, and we have to understand when it starts, when it stops, and how you distinguish between the early stages of a project when you move into the technical side of things. And the last section, I'm going to talk about technology, because how can you have any presentation on architecture and tools without talking about the computer, right? And I will try to address both in terms of softwares, the subject of softwares, as well as the topic of workflow. I'll share with you ways in which I generate my day-to-day drawings and thoughts and ideas, and how I synthesize all of my work together. I'll sort of open that up. So let's start with, if you could hit the next slide, please, Abhijit. So let's start with the first section on ideation, right? So, I mean, I was thinking of the most important sentence with which to begin this whole talk, and who better than Le Corbusier, who said something very poignant about drawing. The quote is, "I prefer drawing to talking. Drawing is faster and leaves less room for life." It's true. I mean, we're all experiencing it in our careers as we move forward, as to how important it is to communicate through the art of the visual. But at the same time, what the quote sort of leaves out is the fundamental aspect of ideation, which is when we become architects, the first thing we need to start mastering, and that hasn't changed for thousands of years, is the hand-eye-mind coordination. It's the fundamental. Technology and every other aspect in architecture comes much later. What distinguishes us from any other human being before we join this discipline is how effectively we develop that coordination moving forward. I'm going to talk also about the idea of sketches and diagrams, as well as the fundamentals of plans, sections and elevations and axonometry, and the idea of wall sections. These will sort of form the toolkit with which we operate in the discipline of architecture. So if you hit the next slide. So let's start by the idea of a sketch, right? Basically, sketch is nothing but a very quick investigation of an idea. And I might use the word idea a lot of times, but in all its uses, to me, in my mind, it's the same definition, which is an idea is something that usually is conjured up in the brain. It's ephemeral. It comes and goes. It's not tangible. It's not a known quantity that you can connect, but at the same time, it's the most important starting point for any architecture at all. And so we need to become and pick up a tool with which we can very spontaneously grasp and capture what's in the mind on paper very quickly. And there is no other tool more spontaneous than the sketch. The image here is an example of a project I'm currently working on in Dublin. It's a housing project. And this particular sketch was conceived with an existing 3D model in the background that we were exploring. And here, what I was trying to draw and suggest was a quick investigation of this corner of the building and how a series of interconnected public spaces tie up the two bars. It's a 20-minute effort, and but it conveys a lot of ideas as to how the space can be broken and developed. Moving forward to the next slide. So a sketch is also fluid. It's very spontaneous. But most importantly, what I like about a sketch is that it's forgiving. You can make arguments with a sketch, and then you can go back on those arguments and change again to new possibilities effortlessly. It has the capacity of depicting very complex thoughts, while at the same time keeping them so loosey-goosey that you don't really have to commit to any single idea. And at the start of any design endeavor, that sort of flexibility is very much desired. as to how you can quickly generate a lot more various options and ideas rather than having to take a lot of effort to generate just one single idea. So, okay, so we're on the right side that I was talking to. So, yeah, so the fluidity and the forgiveness of a sketch is extremely important, allows for a very strong, spontaneous set of rules and organizations right at the start of the conceptualization of a project. Next slide, please. Uh, Here's another series of examples of people in the industry and the kind of sketches that they produce. On the left are a series of sketches by the renowned architect Murphy Yan, who practices out of Chicago. And these sketches basically form the entire timeline of this project. And that's why they're in a whole bunch of series. And when you guys, not that you have to zoom in right now, but later on when you're looking at this presentation again, it's a fascinating story when you zoom in. A lot of those sketches says faxed. So it was produced at a time when faxing was still a thing. And but the main argument and why I'm showing this slide is the consistency of sketching throughout all stages of a project. So the first series right on top are very loosey-goosey, broad brushstroke diagrams, trying to get a semblance of what the mass will look like, what's tall, what's short, what's connected and disconnected. The second series there is a little bit more articulation on the building. And very quickly, Murphy jumps into the idea of the detail, the idea of the facade of the roof. And then from the third and the fourth series onwards, he's totally onto a role of trying to define exactly what it will take for all the building elements to justify the vision. And towards the end, the synthesis of the experience of this building. These of course, these sketches are not produced in isolation. He's constantly working with a team who help and assist him in creating a built environment and a series of drawings which respond to these sketches. And they follow up to the speed with which Murphy produces his ideas. Images on the right, I selected two of these examples, which in my mind are perfect examples of how a sketch and a final built manifestation can completely sync one with the other, even though the projects may be, and the timeline of production of those two things and entities is 5 to 7 years apart. So Stephen Hall and his first watercolor sketches for Linked Hybrid show this idea of these very generic, strong towers connected by equally strong bridges in the form of public program. And what you have in the photograph is nothing but that. It's a simple manifestation of a very early idea and the consistency throughout the project to maintain that vision. And at the bottom left is actually one of my favorite sketches produced by Norman Foster for the competition for the Commerce Bank in Berlin. And here it was the sketch is looking from the eyes of a particular inhabitant of the future building and what they will look around to. They look around to their co-workers, but also at the same time, there's an ambition of relating to the city. And the final manifestation of the tower does exactly what was promised in the sketch. Next slide, please. These are some of my other sketches that I've done over the years on projects. Again, talking about spontaneity. For example, the series on top is a very quick study of a student center for the Washington University in St. Louis, where I wanted to quickly study different design moves, even before getting onto the computer and other things, just to see if there is a direction that can be established. These were purely done by hand, the series on top. However, the series in the bottom I included because they're sort of like a mixed media, still early stages of a project, but the sketch was drawn by hand, but then the entire finishing of the project was done on Photoshop. And to give a sense of an idea, even early on in the project, that a lot of things were measurable, quantifiable, and the idea was lucid and clear. And if you go to the next slide. And I wanted to put these slides together as well because this is the current working from home scenario for me. So like a lot of other people, I've had to transition my work to newer mediums. And I had started exploring the iPad about a year ago, maybe a year and a half. And of late, I'm producing prolifically over that because when you're working from home, there's a limit to the amount of trace roll you can actually use. You don't have all the space to spread out and make big drawings, but you do have this tool, and it's like a walking, talking stationary kit. You can generate all sorts of drawings, primitive sketches, watercolors, what have you. So these are examples of work that I've produced recently using the iPad, and there's so much promise for sketching, which used to be considered as an analog endeavor in the digital realm as well. So next slide, please. So having established the fact that sketching is very primary, fluid, forgiving, and spontaneous, it can help you and assist you with bringing ideas and testing ideas quickly on board. There's another tool in the arsenal, which is the idea of diagramming. And diagram is basically can be made at any stage of a project. And for example, out here, this diagram was produced for a competition we did last year for a concert hall in Lithuania, where we were trying to question the idea of the typical bounding box typology of a concert hall, where everything is so enclosed. And so the diagram sort of talks about the story of taking a very enclosed typology and dismantling it to create a larger public space. So diagrams 2, 3, and 4 just do that. Like, what if you took the box, opened it, sutured it, moved the program to the side, and right at the end you have an elevated piazza. So some very deep narratives, which would otherwise take a whole lot of words and a lot of gesturing to explain, can be very lucidly informed by way of just drawing the basic bare bone structure of a diagram through a diagram. Next slide, please. Well, at the same time, if it can do something very lucidly, it also has the capacity to render, in a way, very complex ideas. This is, you might know this project, it's the CCTV building in Beijing, the central broadcasting headquarters for all of China. And of course, a daunting building like that would have a phenomenal program. And how do you make a drawing that tells you where all the studios are located? How do you navigate through the entire building? What's the public and private program? And these series of sketches, I mean, diagrams rather, are a beautiful way of illustrating some very deep thoughts. And it's all about organization. It's about understanding and simplifying those elements which needs to simplify so that the eye can perceive the overall inherent complexity of a drawing. Next slide, please. But not only is diagram a sort of tool to represent, it's also very much a tool to discover. And who better to suggest that than Arthur Peter Eisenman, right? I mean, all of his initial explorations informed his attitude towards architecture, where he would start with no preconceived notions and keep on drawing and keep on iterating and diagramming and distilling his thought until you would get the final manifestation. So he's a perfect example where you can use the idea of a diagram, if not a sketch, to unearth and discover an idea which you did not really have a notion of before you started the whole project. So next slide, please. And of course, there has to be an attitude when you draw some diagrams, right? Like in the case of OMA and the Seattle Public Library, these diagrams were drawn to challenge the status quo of what is it supposed, what it is exactly to build a library in the 21st century. So very quickly on the left bottom was a diagram as received for the competition brief, identifying all the various programs. Very quickly, they distilled it in the second bar to identify what is the program for the books and what is the rest over space. So it was a 30-60 split. And then they identified if it's a library and we have to engage with all this other program, there has to be a story, a narrative where the books are interdispersed throughout the library, and all the other ancillary programs makes a sort of mixing chamber and things like that interspersed throughout the building. So understanding the program, reacting to the program, and finding the loopholes, which are basically nothing but advantages to create a new sense of understanding of a building typology, can be very succinctly displayed in these diagrams. On the right is an ideogram suggesting the final manifestation and all these various programs and where they're located throughout the space. It's not something to read at, but it just tells you the complexity of a building that we otherwise don't really realize all the time. when we inhabit it. Next slide, please. And finally, diagrams are obviously used to show connection. I mean, the most obvious diagram that all of us get used to is the map for the metro subway and things like that, you know, where you have to go from one station to the other and stuff, and you look at the map. Almost all around the world, the taxonomy and the syntax is so fine-tuned and well-defined that you can find your place in the city. So connecting and circulation has always been the idea of a diagram, and it can be brought down to the level of the building, as is the case in the diagram on the left, where it suggests all the spaces of the gallery of a new museum in New York, and the circulation design in the front, as well as the service-related circulation in the back. And at the same time, also at a neighborhood level, with a new urban infrastructure design, how does it impact on the connectivity within the entire neighborhood, just by using simple lines, colors, and arrows. Very deep concepts can be distilled down to the fundamentals. Next slide, please. And then, of course, what are we doing diagrams for if we are not trying to simplify the narrative of design? This is one of my favorite examples to suggest that, a series of slides for a building which was recently constructed in New York, a residential designed by the Arke Ingels group. And in these series of operations, in these series of diagrams, clear design operations have been documented, from the site to a basic program, to identifying a courtyard, seeing how the courtyard can be pulled and pushed to create both a dynamic form, create viewing corridors, get better light and access, and final manifestation. So it's a way of telling a story which documents every single design move that informs your project. And if you go to the next slide, you will see how when you juxtapose the primary diagram with the final build work, you can literally see, in this case, a perfect synchronicity between the process and the product. Next slide, please. And moving a little out of the realm of buildings is one final example for the diagram where it can be used to very lucidly explain some very large and historical narratives. For example, this is a diagram created by an engineer in France in the 1800s, documenting the entire history of Napoleon Bonaparte's failed Russian cruise. It was a war that Napoleon lost big time. And so to understand the diagram, you need to see that the beige colored bars represent the total number of soldiers that left Kovno to move towards Moscow. And by the time they reached Moscow, an army of 400,000 people was reduced to 100,000, because they lost a lot of people throughout, not because they were engaged in any wartime activity, but just because of the temperature through which they were traveling, which you can see clearly on the bar below in the diagram, which is documenting at every given point in time where there was loss of life, the overall temperature. We're talking here minus 11 degrees, minus 8 degrees. And they reached Moscow. Of course, they didn't have a good sizable population, so they turned around and got defeated. And the black represents the march back to home base. And literally by the time they returned, it was just a handful of 10,000 soldiers, and Napoleon lost all his army. And I mean, you could write a whole essay, you can write a book on this event, or you could make a diagram like this to completely document in one single page over a few gestures and lines in terms of metrics and a scalable volume what the phenomenon was all about. It was also part of the seminal book by Edward Tufte on visualizing information, and is known amongst a lot of people as one of the most loved diagrams of all time. So I thought I would just share it with you. Next slide, please. And a sort of a semi-derivative of the idea of diagramming in distilling is also the style of drawing called the nollie. It was developed as by an Italian architect based out of Rome, Giambattista Nolli. And the idea was that he was investigating into the city of Rome and how much of the city is actually accessible to people. So he started with the codification where everything, all the private houses and all the private properties were sketched in a gray poche, and everything that was accessible to the people was left white, including all the public buildings, which you can see, like for example, the Pantheon in the center of that image. So when you do a drawing like this, it becomes a very good, easily accessible identifier for any city as to its ratio of private to public space. How accessible is your city, and how public it is. So here the plazas, the roads, the pavements, and the buildings all rendered in white. Very simply try to create that sort of narrative. We still use nollies every time we're doing large scale projects, especially in old urban centers where we want to identify the existing conditions of the urban situation. Alongside the nollie, if you go to the next slide, please, is the idea of the figure ground. These are basically, while the nollie tries to identify public to private space, the figure ground simply tries to identify the built space to the unbuilt space in any city. So everything that you see in white here in all these diagrams is just space. They could be roads, they could be parks, they could be rivers, but they're definitely not building mass. And everything that is in black is the building. So if you ask what's the value of making drawings and analyses like this, well, clearly on the right, the three drawings exemplify that. It's 1 square mile block of 3 cities, New York, Rome, and Cairo. And just by one look, you can understand how dense Cairo is because of how little white there is in that diagram, and how more structured New York is, and how Rome is sort of somewhere in the middle. These are very interesting diagrams, very simply generated to identify textures of cities and habitation. It has a long value, and something that we always need to do when we do large scale projects. Next slide, please. And of course, then the mother of all drawing investigations, right? Which is probably one single tool in our arsenal, the plan, elevation section, and axonometry, which is very distinct to our field of architecture. Yes, the arts and other applied arts sort of borrow from it, but drawing plans of a building, well, nobody else does that about other than architects. So the reason why I selected all of them in the title together is because I see design explorations and identifying an idea as a sort of puzzle to solve in a three-dimensional condition. So none of these tools, the plans, the elevation, or section, by themselves give you the entire picture of the three-dimensionality of a building. You need to work with all of them together, as well as the axonometry. So it's like trying to solve a multi-dimensional challenge and using all these tools at your disposal. I've seen a lot of architects work and get engrossed in, even students, as a matter of fact, get engrossed in plans and try to figure it out perfectly, and then move to the elevation, which ends up becoming just the representation of whatever was committed in the plan. But I think it's more of it's like a jugalbandi between all of these 4 strategies that truly allows you to get the right, most reasoned out product. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Amit, we are done with the first set of 20 minutes.
All right. So I think I'll pace up a little bit more. Thank you. Thanks, Manda.
Yeah.
Let me go a little bit more to clarify the other aspects, right? We work on all these things together, but a plan is very different from an elevation. Off late, in our current way of working, elevations, a lot of people do not really draw, but I just want to identify that we should not forget the meaning of and the purpose of elevations. So for example, the Santa Maria Novella Church on the right by Alberti is a perfect example of why elevations were made. They were to establish the golden proportions with which to draw all the elements and to perfectly scale a building in place. So here's the rules of the golden proportions superimposed on the facade, and nothing is out of place. Every single line, every single gesture falls within that proportionality system. On the left are a series of facade studies for a villa in China by Richard Meyer, where again you can see this very strong dependence on mass, void, depth, proportions, transparency and opacity, shade and shadow. that cannot really be explored if you're working on a physical model or a digital model, or even, or definitely not in plan. And you do need the elevation to sort of allow you to proportion your building in a very pleasing way. Next slide, please. And then there's, of course, the section, right? The section always does things that the plan, especially the elevation, cannot achieve. I particularly chose this example of the Folk Art Museum by Todd Williams and Billy Chain in New York to exemplify the real strength of a section. Now, this is an example of a building in the middle of Manhattan with two towers, one on each side, with no setbacks. So the buildings are actually completely sandwiching this lot, and it's a museum. So it needs all its walls to be as opaque as possible so that you can put artwork on it. So basically they found themselves in a situation where all four sides of the building could not really be dependable on getting natural light into this sort of high-rise museum. So, and therefore the section tells you that they started exploring everything from the roof side, the way they broke the slab, the way they gestured through the staircases. And I visited this building when it was still around. Unfortunately, they dismantled it a couple of years ago, but I truly saw the strength of a section and how it was able to get natural light and sun, direct sun, all the way from 5 stories up down to the basement. Not to the basement, but to the ground floor. And so those are things that a section truly can explore and needs to be employed and deployed every time design challenge asks for that. Next slide, please. Now here's an example of taking taking that same tool and investigating it into completely altering an understanding of what it takes to make a section and how the space gets derived out of it. This is a study for a competition done by Peter Heisenman in 1992, the Max Reinhardt Haas. In many ways, the project was very seminal, and I would urge all of you to go online and search for more drawings of this project, because not only did it sort of investigate into a new way of looking at all of these spaces for a typical office tower, it also resulted in some very fantastic ways of drawing and an attitude with which the otherwise very generic experience of a tall building like this can be explored in a completely new light. Next slide, please. And not only is it not only are sections an investigation into bringing light down and explorations of that, sometimes the section becomes the main driving force of the design itself. And these two examples are the best exhibits of what a section can really do. The Unité d'Habitation by Corbusier in the late 50s and Kanchenjunga in the early 80s by Charles Correa, where both examples deal with the idea of the duplex apartment, where you inhabit more than one floor. In case of the Unité d'Habitation, which is the section at the bottom, there's a frugality because it was also a social housing project where the corridor is just on one level, and you can explore the two apartments from that same point of entry. And the apartment on top is portrayed a little bit in gray to distinguish it from the bottom one. And you enter that apartment through the living room. There's a complete experience of a double height volume right there. Take the staircase and move to the rest of the places on top. The reverse happens on the other apartment on the other side of the corridor, which is you enter through the kitchen areas, come down and investigate the rest of your house in the same manner. So it was basically a yin and yang concept, developing one smart section and placing it on two sides to create the entire narrative. Charles did something even more interesting where he took that same rationale of 3 floors, but tried to create a variety of apartments in that. So the one on the lower level has a limited amount of double height spaces. And because it has a limited amount, it allows for the exploration of the upper apartment, where living in a high rise in Mumbai and still having a duplex apartment, creating so many variations just by moving the datum line, could create an architecture where you don't need it to be resolved only through plans and everything. The section can be the driver of the entire design. So moving on from the idea of sections as an important part of the toolkit, we come to the idea of the axonometric. Next slide, please. Sorry. And these are two examples of axonometrics depicting design ideas at completely different stages of the project. So on the left is a drawing by Richard Rogers Partnership for the Barajas Airport in Spain. And here, the main reason for the drawing is to explain the complex set of conditions with which the trusses hold the main concourse area and the roof. As you know, airports are all about minimal structure and maximum circulation areas. And what better way to depict a drawing than something as complex as this, where in an axonometric, the information can be organized in a way that a plan and a section and an elevation cannot, because it helps you see the third dimension in a measurable sort of way, because it's not a two-point perspective. Everything has the same sort of hierarchy. It's the perfect idea of a diagram meeting a drawing. At the same time, on the right, you could do other sorts of axonometrics. In this case, Bernard Schumi, investigating ideas of a folly for his competition, Parc de la Villette in 1983, seminal project, came up with a completely new way of drawing buildings. And it was the strength of the way the project was conceived that gave it all the weight for it to win and carry forward. But here you can see the same art of orthographic projection, where a plan has been moved upwards to create a three-dimensionality of the object, different from the example on the left, but creates an equally strong reading of the third dimension of our drawing. Next slide, please. And the last important sort of a mix of toolkits is the wall section. I very strongly believe, when I was studying in architecture, this was a kind of synthesis of a drawing that we never really investigated, which was, and nowadays in our day-to-day lives, we make these drawings towards the fag end of every conceptual design submission, because what a drawing like a wall section does is, like if you see the slide on the left, it organizes in a very lucid manner a typical portion of the facade to reveal its design intent, in both in its elevational format as well as in plan at the bottom, and a cutaway section of exactly that to show the immediate interior relationship of the details and how it connects to the facade. Without having tried to figure out all the nuts and bolts of the building, a drawing like this very simply sets up the attitude for what is to follow after the design phase. It identifies all the ambition that a project has so far brought to the table, and it also gives a sense of proportionality and connectivity and a bit of resolution as to how this building will probably be put together, and what are the important aspects that should not be missed as we move forward towards advanced stages of the project. Next slide, please. So we've gone through section 1 right now, and we've discovered the whole idea of toolkits, right? So what that gives you, it gives you a language to play with. It gives you a way in which you can memorialize your ideas on paper or other ways of documentation. But now there's another thing which is more important. Having an idea is just one half of the battle. The other is finding means and ways to represent it. And in many ways, representation towards the end makes or breaks an idea. The two go hand in hand. So in this section, we'll talk about what are the various methods that you can adopt to make sure that the idea translates over a period of stages without losing much in translation from one series of drawings to the other. The collages and the renderings play an important role. But after discussing representation, I want to end this section with a little bit of a talk on technical documentation. As you know, technical documentation is a subject in itself, but here I would like to identify the main aspects of why this particular aspect of drawing is differentiated from everything else that derives the concept. And what are the drivers that constitute as part of the technical documentation. So if you move on to the next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the collage, right? It's kind of like a juxtaposition of a very real condition with an imagined believable system, right? Like so, for example, the slide The image on the left of the slide is a collage for an artwork by Christo and Jean-Claude, the very famous artists, for wrapping up the Arc de Triomphe in Paris in the late 80s, I believe. This used to be their style of doing art. It was all ephemeral and temporal, but they always represented their final manifestation of the idea by juxtaposing their work on a very important photograph, which everybody in the city associated with. So sort of trying to create a sort of connection of the known with that which is yet to come in a way that you don't really feel left out of space. So collage is a great bridging drawing strategy where you can show something new in the environment of something that is very familiar to you. The example on the right is the same sort of strategy, but in a digital format, where most often collages in a digital format are centered around a central photograph, which in this case you can see faintly in the back. And every part of the drawing and the design idea emanates from that, sort of like a two-point perspective sort of scenario, with the existing being the focus of the drawing. Next slide, please. And there's no end to the amount of imagination you can take the collages to. Even though it seems like a very rudimentary sort of hack job of using scissors, cutters, and glue to put things together, it's all about the creativity that can completely take the medium to a different level. These are probably two of the best examples I could think of. On the left is a collage for a series done by the Italian architecture firm Super Studio in the I think it was in the early 70s. The series was called The Continuous Monument, and they did many such collages in different parts of the world, this one being in the Swiss Alps and others in New York City and other places, where they brought in this very unimaginable, large scaled and unidentifiable object, almost like an alien spaceship, and located into a place where you wouldn't really expect it. And it creates this very fantastic, violent juxtaposition of what's real and what's believable. And it's a very contemplative drawing in itself. And Rem Koolhaas used exactly that strategy for his graduation thesis with the image on the right, which was, I forget the name, but it'll come to me. But where the idea was to create this very strong series of walls and connecting bridges to bring a new sort of sense of an urban realm inside London City. I mean, but the whole depiction, remember that this was a time when computers did not exist. And yet at the same time, you had to create a very believable sort of realistic image, and collages were very successful in doing that. Next slide, please. Some more examples, because I just love these guys so much, right? Of Christo and Jean-Claude. And as I said before, they use collages in all ways. And this is the image on the left is the floating pier proposal in Italy, which was just constructed 2 or 3 years ago, maybe, as a floating series of bridges and piers in a lake in Italy, where people could come across from outside of the city and just have this experience of walking on water, right? And the slide on the right is a commentary called Mastaba in United Arab Emirates. It's like this ziggurat pyramid sort of extremely large object built out of oil cans, sort of like a commentary on what are we doing to the environment? If all of those are, you can imagine if all those oil cans are empty, this is the amount of quantum of oil that we've already, and so much more than that. But the thing I want to concentrate upon is both schemes use some ways or the other manifestation of the reality juxtaposed to the future that has not yet come to pass. Photographs on the left and a background which was used on the right to create this scalable image. Next slide, please. So having talked about collage, which used to be the predominant system from the 70s, let's move on to something which is the essence of what defines us in our representation strategies today, which is the digital rendering. Uh, I have to say this, how quickly this medium has evolved into becoming the go-to medium of presentation has just completely surprised me. I remember in my first job, I used to use 3D Max to generate images which look nothing like this. And it's just been like 15 odd years. And today we have images where you can smell and feel atmosphere. You could literally, creating the right image could actually make you feel like you're in that experience completely, and you would constantly want to derive that from the built environment. This is an example of a rendering firm based out of Switzerland, I believe, sorry, out of Norway, called Mir, and they specialize in these atmospheric digital environments, and which instantly take you to the place, as well as help you experience the emotion. The next slide, please. Here's another example of what I call a rendering ambitious enough to try and capture serenity and a very meditative moment in the building. I mean, it's not designed to give you a complete sense of space, but it's designed to give you a sense of what kind of emotions will be floating into your head or will you associate with when you're inside the building, even before you've actually walked through the corridors of this building. So next slide, please. And these are some tools that I use to generate images, which I wanted to share. Like this is a rendering that I produced recently for a project we're doing in New York. And I want to talk a little bit more about the tool when we move to the software, because this was used generating Enscape. And I love the software because there's an instant sort of feedback from the time you're drawing and 3D modeling the project, and how quickly you can generate an image to ascertain whether you want to take that direction of design or you want to move to something else. So even though it's in a very digital realm, even though it is very intensive in terms of effort, it has been able to successfully collapse the time between investigating and design and getting a quick feedback of what all your ideas. And if you go to the next slide, you will see a similar example from the inside of that very building. So once you locate all the basic furniture and the general arrangement, you can tell very easily and very quickly whether space will work or not, or whether it satisfies your ambition that you want to achieve. Next slide, please. And this is a rendering of the project that I showed you some diagrams of earlier, the concert hall. And here the whole idea was to trap a sense of warmth, materiality, and light, and to ascertain whether the design decisions were truly strong enough to command a concert hall interior environment. So the atmospherics at play right there. Next slide, please. And so after collages and renderings, let's talk about one of the oldest, one of the most prevalent, and one of the most accessible forms of representation, the physical model. This is an example of a physical model we created in our office for the redevelopment of Mecca in the United Arab Emirates. We're working on this project for a while, and here the idea was it's a sectional cutaway model trying to suggest the existing fabric of the Mecca. You can see the Kaaba, if you're familiar with the place, on the right bottom with that the identifier of that copper tube, and all the way how we designed the fabric so that on the left the new proposal sort of sits in a dialogue between what exists and what is proposed. Also, I'd like to point out here the idea of the 3 tall towers, using a 3D printing software and 3D printers to very quickly generate massive studies. I mean, what would otherwise take a long time is now collapsed into a matter of hours to ascertain whether you headed in the right direction or you need to change strategies. Next slide, please. But it's not just about the final moment of the design idea that needs to be captured in a model. The main essence of the model is to track your design philosophy, to memorialize and make physical all the random thoughts that come into your head, right? So here I'll quote Narendra Sagu from Foster Partners, who said very vividly about such models that blue foam is the 3D, blue foam being the material with which all these models are created. Blue foam being the 3D is to 3D what sketching is to paper, talking about spontaneity, right? Like just as quickly as we can put a 2D idea from a thought to trace, with blue foam and with blue foam cutting tools, you can very quickly just assemble a full-fledged digital idea in 3D format. And what it helps is, especially for those designers who want to discover idea through iteration, this is the perfect tool. So these examples are of CCTV and some other towers done by OMA, where a constant investigation into an idea and creating multiple iterations is easily allowed by such medium. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Amit, on your request, the second set of 20 minutes we are done with.
Okay, perfect. So I'll pace up a little bit more so that I can finish in on time. Thank you. And study models can be used at all stages of the project. Here's a great example of using it on the left during the early stages to describe and encapsulate a novel form, and on the right to give you a relationship of highly detailed exterior facade and all the systems that go into place and all the thinking that is documented in a physical format. Next slide, please. And like how we used to work with Lego as kids and try to build very complex things, or people play with airplanes and ship models. Here's a perfect example of a cutaway sectional model by Morphosis. Towards the end of a project, trying to engage the viewer into what does it really take to conceptualize an act of architecture, right? Everything that is drawn, everything that is built has been memorialized in this sectional model. And it's a very powerful tool to convince and communicate your ideas to a much larger audience. Next slide, please. And don't forget the whole aspect of it's not just about communicating the idea, but also challenging the idea of architecture. And how you make a model has a lot to do with that. So this, for example, is Daniel Liebeskind's proposal for a competition in Potsdamer Platz in Berlin in 1991, where he challenged the whole notion of a site that was given for the competition, and as a given element, but rather permeated his design thinking towards other aspects of the city and other parts of the city, trying to suggest that the building has to think outside of its confines of the four lines that define a site, but how it actually is one more addition to all the energies that inform city dwelling. More like a cerebral way of making a statement through model making. Next slide, please. So if we've talked about how to take ideas and talk about representing them, the final two stages of this entire endeavor, which leads to the presentation, is one of them is the storyboard. It's basically a borrowed idea, which is very effective in the architectural discipline. It comes from movies and comics. So, for example, if you see these two images on the left, is a storyboard that was created for an episode called The Dance of the Dragons for the Game of Thrones series. So it's a brilliant way of illustrating what will unfold through the episode and what is the ambition, where will the cameras be located, where will the actors be, and the whole cinematography and the whole vision of what is to be shot and storytelling is encapsulated right at the start in a storyboard before you embark on the shooting. And in a similar way, you could use the storyboard as a graphic organization technique, which consists of all the illustrations and all the ideas that you have been investigating during concept design stage, and to synthesize it into the final story. So the images on the right are by Narendra Sagu at Foster Partners, where these quick, beautiful sketches start talking about what is the ambition of the project, how does it engage, in this particular case, a public project, and how will it engage with the rest of the inhabitants of the city. And these also become sort of drawings which then identify the renderings and the view selections that will inform the final representation of the project. Next slide, please. And then, of course, comes the final moment of putting all of this together and making the final statement, the final communication in terms of presentation panels, whether it's for a competition, whether it's for a client meeting, or most importantly, whether it's for a design thesis or any other design studio that you take part in. If you are not able to synthesize, understand, distill, remember, and document the whole design process in full clarity towards the end in a presentation panel, it's almost, it could be the most miserable place to be in. And I see this a lot of times where this is the fundamental place where a lot of architects, either they get tired or they just don't lose vision or sight, where they muck it up. So I've seen a lot of panels where it almost reads like a newspaper, whereas architecture is such a visual medium that you should never forget that you have to depend upon the visuals and the drawings to really convey the story and to communicate and take the project forward. Here I've selected 2 panels from the same competition, trying to show there is no end to the limit as to how you can organize information. Both of these projects, both of these panels actually resulted in one being the winner and a second runner-up. They both organize their respective ideas beautifully. One also uses the idea of color and desaturation to good effect, while the other remains in the realm of the black and white, a very limiting medium if you don't know how to use it, but actually creates some really stirring and moving images. So it's the ultimate tool to bring all of that story and all of that effort into the final representation, and should never be taken lightly. Always give yourself enough time to synthesize, storyboard, and design and execute the presentation panels. Next slide, please. And now we move on to something slightly different, which is the idea of technical documentation, right? So within the confines of the studio space, before a building moves onto the site, there are really 4 stages that identify a project: initial concepts, schematic designs, and then design documentation and construction drawings. So what we spoke about up till now sort of comprise of the first 2 stages. And after schematic design, we all know that building is an effort of a whole lot of team players, architects and otherwise, a lot of consultants, and they all need to bring in and start communicating with each other to define what is the ambition of and what it will take to make a building. So these are drawings created at late schematic design stages and early design documentation stages. So you can see clearly the drawing on top, still trying to refer to the idea of the atmospherics and the materiality from a very visual standpoint. But when you move on to design documentation, there is a lot more dependency on metrics, empirical values, specifications, drawing things as they really mean, as they will really show up on site. And that's basically, and at the same time also synthesizing all the other inputs that the consultants bring in, whether it's in the plan where you have to start thinking about ducts and things like that. So technical drawing moves into a completely different realm. It does owe itself a responsibility that the design vision that has been clearly established in the first 2 stages constantly remains intact moving forward and becomes more real as you keep drawing. Next slide, please. These are all drawings from a project we recently finished. It's a small, simple, but highly detailed project. And here's a perfect example at construction documentation level, what the wall section may look like, right? So if you remember from our first section, now here, what's really happening is a lot more commitment and intent has gone into the connections, materiality, and all the layerings of all the various things that comprise the building facade goes into place, as well as annotations which read in terms of codifications, which basically the whole set reads like a book. And from one drawing, you literally give the address to where you will go to find the next series of details. It's a way of communicating very precise information in a very systematic sort of manner, from the elevation to the right to the wall sections in the middle, covering all the various unique aspects within that bay, and a 3D rendition of all of those elements come together. Next slide, please. And here's an example of that rigor finally culminating into the built format. From the left, very clearly drawn junction detail, trying to understand how the folded plate system will really bend the corner. And then you can see it manifested in the final photograph. So it's this stage is as much creative as the first half, but the creativity here is a completely different sort of empirical set of rules, and it's more about getting the information communicated right and without missing anything, as it is about making sure that the design intent continues forward throughout the life of the project before it gets built. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So now we're at the last section where we'll talk about technology, softwares, and workflow. So, and I'll quickly go through this whole thing. So if you can hit the next slide. So technology, right? So as architects, we have a whole buffet of softwares available to us. So on the left is every single thing that has come out in the last 10 to 15 years, which me or other people in my team almost check all the boxes in all of these softwares. It's today in the digital world, with all the complications at our disposal, it's not very easy to achieve everything from start to end with using just one single tool. And we've got to be a master of juggling between various softwares. So for example, on the right is a sort of mind map of what I use at various stages of project for myself. For digital modeling, I use Rhino, Stress, and SketchUp. For drawing, it's mostly on AutoCAD and digital sketching in terms of Morpholio or Procreate. Representation is usually, of course, Photoshop and diagrams on Adobe Illustrator. And the reports and everything and the synthesis of the panels happens in InDesign. Rendering is V-Ray and Enscape. Physical modeling goes via the 3D printer now with the Ultimaker. And design documentation is primarily Revit, supported by AutoCAD from time to time. Next slide, please. And now I'll give you a glimpse of the workflow. What my work generally looks like at the starting stages of a project. So these are when I'm working on massing investigations. The upper image is exploring various forms for the tall towers. And these are all generated out of Rhino. The model is in Rhino. And the image is rendering done on V-Ray. At this stage, I try to, as much as possible, make the rendering look like a wooden model for ease of, it makes the massing more accessible to my eye, makes it a little bit more real. It's not abstract, it's like a thing. And whatever doesn't work with the digital model, at the same time, we do very quick plexi studies. This is an example of the Dublin project again, where program and green space are all simply cut on colored plexi and stacked one on top of the other. And we create multiple different combinations of these within a day to ascertain the flow of program. Next slide, please. When we keep progressing into the design and moving forward, things get a little bit more real, a little bit more detailed. So on top is an image of a wireframe of my Rhino model for a project I'm currently involved in for Kuwait University. And you can see everything from the railings to the sit-out space to the glazing systems to the mullions that hold the glazing is all there in intent. It may not be 100% accurate and they might not be all the details there, but it's definitely advanced from the previous version. And at the bottom is an image that gets quickly created, outputted out of Enscape. Like I said before, a very quick feedback loop establishes a more empirical way of approaching design moves. Next slide, please. And then, of course, there's a documentation when certain goals have been achieved in design. And then there's Revit and AutoCAD to take you through. And there's always a back and forth. There are certain things, challenges on site for which you have to, again, go back and open 3D model and then do a back and forth and talk. But that's part and parcel of building any building, I assume. So, and the next slide will be the final slide for the presentation, where let's talk a little bit about the future. Augmented reality is here, right? One key example of technology is this very forum that we are in right now. I don't know the number of participants, but I'm talking to from my living room to about more than 150 people on the other side of the globe. So future is very much an optimistic thing. Virtual reality is what we have started using on a daily basis. The image on the left is an example of using augmented reality, where you simply print out, in this case, a site plan and place it on a table, and all these people were handed iPads with a particular app, which allowed you to synchronize. The moment you put the iPad and hovered it over that 2D image, the application recognized the four corner coordinates of the graphic and mapped it to an embedded digital model in the app to create an instant rendition. And when you walk around with the iPad, the model actually moves and shows you all the three sides as if it was physically there, almost trying to simulate the experience of what it would be like to hold a model. And now can you imagine that iPad becomes a headgear? Then you can completely inhabit the space and start walking in a realm that doesn't even exist at this point in time. So I think with that, I'll open it up for a healthy question and answer session. Yeah, let's engage in some sort of back and forth.
I think the students are stunned. They haven't opened channel so far. I'm seeing the chat box. They haven't opened it. I will request the students to get out of their state of maybe pondering. I think they are probably pondering over. I'm sure there are a lot of questions that they have, and they'll start coming up. In the meanwhile, I'll just help the situation currently so that they can enter into the dialogue. I'll just try to offer a let's say it's a synopsis probably of all that we could see.
Right.
This brought memories of a very peculiar kind of a myth and this legend that we have in Indian kind of mythology. Where we talk about the concept of the architect for gods, who is Vishwakarma. And there's this demon who is supposed to be working with that architect, with Vishwakarma, who is Maya. And there have been many instances in which Vishwakarma summons Maya, and then they create an illusionary kind of a space. And there is an example also from the Mahabharata where we have Krishna tells the people of Mathura that we need to shift from here. Jarasandha is attacking us time and again. And it will be nice if we can go away from this place so that we can have peace, because development requires peace. So people say, we are not agreeing with you. What will be the new scheme like? We have no idea at all. You might probably be able to look at it, but we don't have an idea. So Krishna summons Vishwakarma, who in turn calls Maya, and they both present in front of in the Darbar. They present the idea of how the new city would be, and by telepathy, Krishna already has communicated to Vishwakarma what is his desires, and Maya through Vishwakarma is already into the telepathic mode, and in a fraction of a second, they create that illusion in front of everyone that this is how the new Dwarka would be, and Krishna said this will be called Dwarka. It's an amazing thing. So actually, we are talking about augmented reality in that time. We don't know if that is history or that is always debatable, but the idea is that people have written about it, that there was this instance and there were these kind of instances in which people of that prowess or that, let's say, accomplishment could come up and create this kind of a space in which you could enter in and you could be able to connect your coordinates of your mind with the coordinates that they are wanting to float in front of you. So don't know what kind of knowledge they have or what kind of knowledge we had as a civilization at that point of time. But today somehow we are able to find that as an echo, as a worldwide kind of a phenomenon, and people are able to relate far better in the last example that we show, augmented reality, which is slowly creeping into our regularity of life and changing the way we start looking at things. And it is creating things, it's like an utopian kind of a space, virtual space, definitely, but previously it was just real virtual space. Now it is also an utopian virtual space where it is becoming a part of a reflection of our imagination. So it's representing our imagination. It's a wonderful kind of a premise that we all are standing at. Let's see if students are opening up. We have someone coming in. The impact of, you can choose.
There are questions on the chat, so we can. The impact of technology on an architect. I mean, if anything, my own trajectory and my upbringing as an architect and where I am right now is a perfect example, manifesting that technology has to be embraced, it has to be understood, and it has to be critically used in a very cerebral manner. Our world is complex, right? So the impact of technology is going to be huge. In fact, at this point in time, we are standing at a very uh, crucial juncture, I would say, more than any other time. Because think about it, what I showed you had examples from the 1970s, which a lot of us don't even relate to anymore, or hardly do. I don't remember the last time I made a collage, or if I ever did. And so architecture is changing very fast. It has a 10 to 15-year cycle where a completely new technology shows up and tries to rock the boat. I would say the impact should be seen as a very positive light, and it will definitely evolve the profession. I don't know if that answered the question, but let me look through some of the other questions. Similarly, the thought of technology taking over architecture. Nah, I think this will be, this is a very sort of a very controversial statement. I don't think anyone's taking over. We're not in the era of Terminator, let's say, where we are able to have a lot of control over this technology, and it is a very mute. It can do a lot of things for you, but you still need to program it. You still need to tell it what to do. So there is a back and forth that can be created, and it allows you to do a lot of things you would never have thought, and it collapses the time frame in which you can achieve that. So I think it's a very positive way of looking at it. Session was helpful for us understanding about representation technology, but could you explain some more on the concept of knowledge? Well, I think at this forum, the best thing I could say is there's so much data available online regarding this thing because it's such an established method. Uh, the main idea is to sort of try to understand by a very simple synthesis of a drawing the amount of space in the city that is available for public consumption and the amount of space that is private. So, and the drawing does exactly that. It tries to achieve a syntax, a way of drawing, which visualizes uh, um, that outcome. Uh, Lovely examples. What is your take on digital versus traditional ways of representation? I think I answered it a little bit in the first half, but I can elaborate it a little bit more. I think um, I would not call it digital and traditional. I would call it digital and analog, right? Because traditional can have two notions. I mean, it's what's been happening for a long time, but no, I mean, we don't sketch the way we used to sketch 500 years ago. So everything is constantly evolving. Even the analog is evolving, and digital, of course. So uh, my take is that architects are in a very good position where our arsenal of ways of communicating have expanded uh, manifold, and if anything we should keep an open mind, especially you guys. You guys are like 10 times better when you will graduate and using technology and all of these things than me or Mandar or any of us could ever be. So there's nothing to be scared about. Master both aspects and try to play in this dual world, so to speak. So the session was very helpful for us understanding our representation. But could you? Oh, I read that already. Sorry. We students really are stans are the real problem in our creative way in which we communicate our design and ideas to others. Got so many ideas to go. Oh, that's not a question. Sorry. Lovely example, sir. What is your take on? Okay, answered already. In the scenario of lockdown and digital presentation, what could be a better alternative of scale drawing panels to explain the technical detail at scale? Is the visual scale enough, or there are different variety of opportunities? I don't know if I understand the question clearly. Enough, or so I'll pass it on, and if Ashish can elaborate more, I'll respond to it.
Actually, I think he's
Uh,
saying that in a virtual space, it's difficult for the layperson to get a hang of what is the comparative or relative scale.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. I would word it in. I would word the question back at you, saying that only in the remaining only in the digital. Yes, you will be a little confused, and that's why we need to exercise all of these tools, right? I mean, don't lose sense of the physical. Completely embrace the digital, and between all of those tools, an ever evolving and ever complex scenario can still be very well handled. I think whenever you find that the digital model is not really giving you a feedback on scale, go back to our analog ways of working. Work on the section, draw a full scale section, sketch. Well, sketch not maybe, because sketch is a little fluid and misleading, but definitely plans, elevations, and sections. Don't forget about them. And there has to be a constant back and forth.
I
between
think
those
this
two
question
categories?
comes from actually probably this student is representing all the fifth-year students in maybe in India for that matter, because all of them are waiting for what is the final decision on their presentation. Are they going to go and present their thesis, or they're not going to go and present their thesis? So there was a big debate in the academic forum about the idea of presenting online, where people were of the opinion, students were of the opinion that you will not get an idea of scale. Actually, I don't know, that argument is probably a little bit skewed. Any architect who understands scale and proportions will definitely be able to understand and make meaning from whatever you're presenting. So it's a bigger
Understood.
debate, yeah, but it's a convenient position that maybe the two sides are probably wanting to look for. I think there's an interesting question also from YouTube, because we are open on YouTube as well. We are live on
All
YouTube, this
right.
forum currently. We
Mhm.
have a question which talks about there are different design principles while designing. And while designing, do we need to follow them? For example, like symmetry, golden ratio, hierarchy, geometry, addition, subtraction, or it is as per what is relevant. So I think it's a question probably from a student.
I think these are more than principles. I would call them strategies that you can take. A strategy in itself is just a tool to get an idea out, to test it, to see whether it works or it doesn't work. When from the mind, when it comes down to paper, has it still remained the same, or was there something lost? Uh, so I would say let's not word it principles, call it strategies. And then at the start of your career, especially as a student, you need to be extremely flexible. You need to have tried and tested every single thing, because what works for someone else doesn't work for somebody else, of subtraction, this, that, and the other. Like, I'll give you an analogy of a 3D modeling software, whichever one it is,
Yeah.
right? It's not like it just gives you one way of modeling. It gives you an array of tools, and then it's on
Right.
the decision of the model maker to engage in where he wants to take the idea and what tool works best for the idea. I
Yes.
think, yeah.
There's one more very interesting position that the student is identifying. The student is making this point that we have all kinds of ways of looking at how technology is coming with a certain idea of new ways of looking at things and also representing them. We are using the
Mhm.
space effectively, and we are experimenting as well and exploring this space. But when we are presenting or communicating it outside to the common man or to the world outside, we are assuming that the common man would be probably be a part of this culture and will try to make sense and relate to the presentations and schema that we are offering. So the argument that this person is putting up is, isn't it necessary that we try to find out what are the kind of relations this common man has, so that the common man can understand better and is in a better position to receive our ideas in a better way? What's your probably thought on that?
Well, the interesting thing about the analogy of common man is that, let's not forget, we are all in a way common men. It distinguishes us from which discipline we look at. The common man is an expert in some discipline, and we are common to them as well. So, but in talking about it in terms of whether a common man perceives the ever evolving medium of representation, well, that is for us to find out. At one time, the same question could have been asked about the first movies when cinema just started, right? Like, will people be able to understand something, actors, when they're not in the physical realm but are actually portrayed on a screen? And will the narrative be real? Will they be able to engage the audience? And look, in the last 70, 80 years, that medium is the mainstay for storytelling. So, and a common man consumes it the most than anybody knows. So, I would say that it's always a back and forth between trying to test out. You need to be aware, certainly, of who you're communicating to, and you need to modulate your message accordingly. But I don't think technology per se has anything to do with it. Human beings are very advanced uh, individuals, and we are always surprised with how quickly they can adapt to new circumstances. So I think that
Hmm.
shouldn't be a limiting thought at all. Yeah.
Right. So broadly, I just blended two, three questions. There was a question also
Sure.
about relevance of how do we represent in today's times? Or is technology really taking the front seat and driving the whole thing, or are we making a relevant kind of a interjection in the mind of people? But as you rightly said, it's important that to accept how society is moving forward. We are all in a bigger kind of a spirit of the situation, and the circumstances are impacting all of us together in the same manner. And it is just a matter of time with the kind of exposure and the facilitation that is available for people to start getting into this domain. So on one side, it is important that we pursue what is happening today and what is probably expected to happen tomorrow. And on the other side, it is also important to connect relevantly with the kind of end target, as we can say, so that we can appropriate our drawing communication from their perspective as well, so that they can enter into the dialogue through us, through our particular medium. So the architect is interestingly poised not only to represent the kind of client that he or she has been commissioned, but also at the same time the people who are going to frequent the users or the kind of target groups. So that is an interesting kind of a, let's say, overall kind of a structure that we are looking for. Also, as I was saying, the synopsis that I was wanting to talk about, because we have had several questions now, it brings me to trying to simplify so that people probably saw 70, 80 slides, and I'm just trying to give a very simple kind of a diagram to it. I'm looking at it as our core fundamental is to strike a dialogue.
Right.
As professionals, as design professionals, any kind of designer, whoever it is, which are architect, fashion industry, etc., is to strike a dialogue. And the process, more or less, is very generic across fields. Design is a field in itself. It's a field, call it a field in itself. So look at it like this: that the first idea is dialogue with the self, where you showed the ideas of sketches, the ideas of doodles, where you're trying to come to terms with your own ways of probably addressing what you're encountering. Then the idea of dialogue with circumstances, where you're trying to understand what is it that is on offer as reality, and then we start looking at the idea of the pre-design approach, where you see what kind of regulations, what kind of probably limitations, what is the SWOT, and how do we start organizing it. Maybe it can come as a diagram, maybe it can come probably as some kind of a model that we are creating as a diagrammatic model, that this is the proposition of the site. Let me start thinking like this. So what we showed about Aaron Koolhaas and Norman Foster as an example, the triangular building in the urban kind of a dense corner. So, and then the third idea is the dialogue with creation, where we start talking about invention, where we start talking about innovation, where we start talking about the spatiality of what we want to handle. So plans, elevations, sections, and axometric, as you rightly positioned them. As part of the creative kind of a dialogue with the product or the content that we have created so far in the first two dialogues. Then from there we come to the idea of the dialogue with the user, the dialogue with the operator. We are looking at how do you communicate the emotion, how do you communicate the feel, where renderings become important. So we are trying to communicate some kind of an emotional idea, a sensorial kind of a concept to someone. And also we are looking at documentation drawings, we're looking at technical drawings, and we're trying to communicate also to the operator. This has to be operated in this way so that it can yield this emotional probably content or result, or a sensorial exploration, or a sensorial kind of an outcome. And then it's all back and forth actually. I'm not looking at it as a sequence from 1 to 10. I'm looking at it as a loop. So it will keep on, it will keep on going back and forth as people give you feedback, and then you can again revisit your stage of dialogue and then correct it eventually as per the relevant situation. And I think the last dialogue, I would prefer to term it not as last, but then I'll say the loop which is going is the dialogue of furthering the argument. So we started off with certain position. Maybe that position has some other way of probably getting addressed. That's where experts, that's where peers come into the play. When you were discussing about the thesis panel and the kind of final presentations that we need to do, we're also presenting the work to the users. We're also presenting the work to city, to society, to our neighbors, to the communities, to so many people who are going to have some stake, some part in the projects that we are doing, which will impact their lives as well, influence their lives. So there is an argument, and this argument is always challenged. It is always debated, and new ways come out of it. And beautifully, we also talked about how do you finally put up your entire argument and present it as a panel so that it can take these kind of questions. It can take this kind of engagements with the larger audience. So this 5 kind of dialogues is what I would probably bring forth as a synopsis of all that we just went through.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll also want to see if we can take one last probably question.
I'd definitely like to take 2 questions because I know these 2 people very well.
Please choose.
So can I pick up Mahesh Nayak and Kiran Keluskar?
Yes. Your colleagues.
All right.
Yeah. Hello, Amit. Good morning.
Hi Mahesh, how are you doing?
Hi. Fine, Amit.
Yep.
Good present. Very, very impressive presentation.
I would suggest you go one by one.
Yeah.
Kindly go one by one.
Yes, Mahesh.
Yeah, very impressive presentation, Amit. Very much impressed.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
But my question is like, I wanted to ask, like, we have so much technology right now, so advanced technology. But I have seen that it has an impact on designing because of the advancement of technology. For example, just if we didn't have anything and we just have wood, so when we make something with wood, our design changes. But when our technology is so soft now, that now every architect more or less can arrive at a very organic shape also. I'm not talking about organic architecture, but organic shape because of the
Right.
technology. And they can just with the help of this technology they can make structures like Franco Gehry's or Daniel Libeskind, any shape, anything like a cloth wrapped on around the building. but
Right.
but I feel that still we are not able to touch or able to achieve a masterpiece yet. But when we had lack of technology, that time we were able to get more of a masterpiece. So I feel that the technology is little bit like it is making blind to the approach of design.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think I'll have to intervene. We just have 2 minutes. If Amit, you
Okay.
can
yeah,
for
yeah,
this
sorry.
event, later on
Sure.
we can expand the discussion
Yeah,
because we have
yeah,
architect Chitra
sorry for
Vishwanath
this.
joining
Like,
in. Yeah, yeah.
just wanted to say
Sure.
in short, if you can, then
Well, I hear you, Mahesh, and I also know where the question is coming from because I know you intimately from years before, right? I think the only thing we can do with change is we can embrace it or we become irrelevant, right? Um, if you see that current masterpieces, though I disagree with the fact that we haven't had masterpieces in recent times, because we have, but if even if we establish it that we haven't, then there's no reason why we still can't use the same technology and make sure that we do. I mean, technology is not the enemy here. It's our relationship with technology uh, that is not allowing us supposedly to achieve what that sense of refinement you're talking about. So I believe that especially for the young generation, we may still be in a cusp situation, you and me in our careers, we can go either way. But in a couple of years, you will not be able to ask the question, the future architect. They will have to embrace technology. Their kids would be born in technology, right? So there will be no other world. The other world would have been something they haven't inhabited. So I think we need to be agile. Technology, if we have not been able to achieve what we used to do before with it, we need to try harder.
Yeah, it's an
yeah,
interesting way to
yeah,
put into perspective the space that we all are in. We are in a pluralistic space in many ways. There are different. We are lucky, in fact, and we can go backward, or we can go forward and try to choose what we want to and make it relevant. But
yeah,
tomorrow's age, we will have many professionals who will probably be looking at just one option, or probably they'll be trying to answer questions through one option. So nicely positioned, and
uh,
also
yeah.
right
I
time
would like to
to take the discussion to the next stage where we're
uh,
talking
uh,
about
Atar,
uplift.
I just want to add on little, like Amit, you said very relevantly. I agree totally. But we have to be just conscious what I mean to say. But I accept what you're saying. We have to embrace technology, but with consciously, not becoming a slave
Right,
to it.
Absolutely.
right,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
Uh,
coming to what we were looking at, I think the stage is nicely set. We can have this discussion in the culminating space. I would request Kiran also to engage with Amit in the culminating space after this presentation is done, so that we can take to the next stage. We were talking about appropriating technologies, and we were also looking at this idea of how do you start deciding what is alternate technology or what is relevant technology, and how do you start looking at this idea of why a certain technology is the only thing that is good for what I want to do, and what is the space of exploring. How do you probably open up and expand on your own knowledge on what is the available technology, what other technologies are probably capable to do. So in that frame of things, our next session would also be an interesting way of looking at how do you try to address this question. So allow me to bring into our discussion architect Chitra Vishwanath. Madam, if you're here, can you please confirm?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful, wonderful, ma'am. Apologies for the inconvenience.
I must
Yeah,
listen to alert.
yeah. So I welcome you on behalf of our students, on behalf of our principal, Professor Anand Achari, our faculty visiting, as well as all the faculty members who have joined us here as guests, and our first year management and trustees of the Vivekanand Education Society. So largely we are looking at this question before we joined us. We were looking at appropriation of technology. How does the designer look at it? And we are nicely positioned now to understand why are we discussing the whole point of what is alternative? Why alternative? So I
Yeah.
was saying, allow me to set the stage. We were looking at, in this session, we are entertaining the idea of, we are trying to delve into logic of the use of alternative forms of construction.
Yes.
With a look at also when the alternative of now was actually de rigueur once upon a time. So how does one define alternative? Further, we'll also open discussion on the making of the alternative, supposedly, structure through the discipline of drawing, which is a very important act in itself. We just went through session 1, which talked about drawing as a representational tool. The talk will also leave the subject of drawing as an open-ended kind of aspect to discuss with the spectators here that we have today, whether drawings are the future or not. Are we looking at a future which is going to be without drawings? Are we going to build without drawings? Just to make a point here, till the Renaissance, we were making buildings without drawings, just so that people can start thinking thousands of years mankind has prepared buildings without drawings. It is only the recent history of 300, 400 years that we are very strongly engaging in the idea of drawings and creating buildings. So it's a different space altogether. So this space also we can open up in this discussion as the drawings of, are we going to look at drawings in the future or not? So nothing definitive. It's all open to what kind of dialogue we can have. And taking you to the session, let me first introduce architect Chitra Vishwanath. She's the managing director, also the principal architect at Biome Environmental Solutions, which is situated in Bangalore. She was born in Benares and she has graduated from architecture college at SEPT, which is Ahmedabad. She studied civil engineering as well and diploma in Nigeria at the Auchi Polytechnic from 1977 to 1980. So she has a background of looking at structures in a specific way. After graduation in the year 89, she moved to Bangalore and started her firm, which was named or identified as Chitra Vishwanath Architects. And very interestingly, in 91 to 2008, the firm has changed its name and become trying to address the idea of relevance by looking at, by naming itself as Biome Environmental Solutions, since it was felt by all of them that the practice is a collaborative one and it is addressing ecological issues through design as its focus. So Biome was has spearheaded many campaigns for rainwater harvesting, for ecological sanitation practices throughout India. And it is relevant in today's times. It has worked at both the grassroots level, where they're implementing toilets for the people at floodplains, let's say, for example, at Bihar, as what they have identified here, as well as being part of the policy level implementation, which is at the government level and the center as well as the state. So it's an interesting practice which is spanning at root level as well as at the policy and decision-making levels as well. Biome has won several notable awards in the IIA and the 2AA awards and rethinking the future. For Chitra Vishwanath, the architecture is moving beyond creating physical spaces, but actually talking about creating ecosystems. The built is to be a positive part of the environment. And for that to happen, architects need to go into being part of the community, which is a very important point she wants to present to us. She has been the Charles Correa Fellow in 2017 at the Goa School of Architecture for Housing Studio Design in 2017. She's also taking the monsoon semester studio at SEPT, which is looking at retrofitting and ecosystem. From currently in August 2020, she'll be opening the sessions. Her passion is to work with ecosystem design, create simple, agile solutions which can be handled by community participation and low-level technology. Her parents were from Kochi. Her father being a famous sculptor, M.V. Krishnan, and she has spent many summers in the Tar House at Fort Kochi, which is a very interesting precinct and place to be at, and very inspiring indeed and imaginative. So I would invite you, ma'am, and request you to take over the proceedings. We can have you here.
Yeah. So am I there? Am I visible? So, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have my. You'll be presenting your slides, right? If I'm not wrong.
I'm trying to open.
If there are any problems, we are here. Our colleague Abhijit has your presentation on standby. We can start if you request us to go ahead.
Sure. Please excuse my dog. I can't control him. Control my husband better, but less of him. So while it's opening, yeah. So thank you very much. Thank you, Vivekanand Education Society and the Institute of Architecture for inviting me here. I'm really sorry that I missed the earlier one. And I remember only the last sentence. I think it's Amit who said that we have to be agile. So the idea of agility is something which we need to be discussing in our architecture a lot more and very seriously. So I'm also very indebted to Professor Mandar for his patience in guiding me through this web of webinars. I'm also glad that there are many students here, so a big shout out to all of you. You're studying one of the best courses which can bring about much change through the direct actions you take. Especially at these times, you have to be very sure of the kind of actions you take. So here I'm presenting the concepts which biome follows of making of the structure. So what is it? What do we really need in tropical climate? So I'm also going to be extremely contextual, extremely to our context, and I'm taking examples of in and around Mumbai, and in the end, I will show a project of in Bangalore, which we did, which Mandar asked me to show. So when you start inhabiting, especially in tropical climate, in the shelters, what are you looking for? For me, it is that I need shade and a bit of movement of air. And all this is possible, and it comes from the context we are in. Where are the materials coming from? Now, in an agricultural society, the material came as what was an agricultural byproduct, and then from your own land. So these are curvy grass for walls, wattle daub, and above a thatch from the stalks of rice. So it all probably, in most cases, is not being accepted as architecture. But now we need to really look at what we define as architecture. And we look at this material. Can we see that there are just two materials in the whole construction here? Earth, the soil, which is right there, and the grasses, different kinds of grasses, and some pieces of wood, which would be a byproduct of scouring for firewood. And then the wall makes for both privacy, allows for light, allows for ventilation. And further, this is a project near Pune, and where there is a little more of stone use because stone is available in the land, again with earth, again curvy grass, and a sheet above instead of using thatch. So again, the interior is just 2 or 3 materials. But what I found in this hut most beautiful was the use of the precast concrete poles, which are being used all over for making fences. And this pole is now replacing wood, which otherwise was going to be more expensive to bring, and it's easily available. So the whole design of even what we call as vernacular is something which is with the time. And the whole idea of being attached to vernacular, being a Haveli or a Vada, is quite unfair. We have to really look at vernacular as part of the time and how it keeps evolving. I go to Assam, and I'm just bringing the similar way of building, and in different regions. Here too, it's wattle and daub with the earth, and you can see the earth, and you can see the materials for construction right around you. And as it goes further, similar materials and a little more craftsmanship, better craftsmanship, because probably they have that inclination and the way they look at it. And interiors, again, same materials used for walls, for windows, for allowing for air, and even for cooking. The next example is Gandhi's ashram at Wardha. To me, this is kind of the mother of wattle and daub construction, mother of design too. It's amazingly beautiful, a must visit. I hope all of you would do. And then the design in terms of making it more aesthetic, more relevant, even more towards the climate. And to be very fair, it's designed with a capital D. You see this 2 levels of veranda, so you're not really exactly into the edge of the open space, but you are 1 step away. So this becomes a space which is also a living room, and the insides are whitewashed, so better light, better feeling inside, but still the same material for windows as what is for wall. So what's common in all this? What we see is the use of soil, a kind of grass, there are earth blasters, there are deep overhangs, there are smaller openings, and there are semi-open space. All correct for the context of the climate. And we have to be a lot more relevant with the context of climate even more now. Now we have dictates all over saying that number of people allowed can be higher if the office space is naturally ventilated. Yes, surely HVAC people will go on to a very fast mode and would like to put in more systems of air exchanges, which will take even more energy. But the simple factor that if we only design with climate, we could do a lot better. And the quest for alternative happens with materials, skills, and the meaning embedded in it. So we go to look at the works of what we would call Gandhi of architects. He used bricks because bricks were easily available in Kerala, because you took out the silt from the ponds, from the lakes, from near the rivers, and burnt them and made bricks. And as you see in this building, bricks for walls, bricks for jalis, bricks for supporting the staircase, and keeping the spaces naturally ventilated, a little bit of grill for safety, but otherwise it's just, you have to have a lot of air, so air is available. And it takes it to the higher context, even to making a restaurant. In a very small plot, you makes a restaurant. The coffee house is an iconic building and extremely simple, but simple with extreme deep thoughts. So while Professor Mandar was talking to me, he sent me a topic saying, how do you pre-design to details would be the way I could talk. And the process of engaging alternative building technologies for architectural projects. I thought I would take up a project of ours and show it that it is not at all just a project where you go into a space quite unlike what we saw in the beginning of the slideshow, where people built on their own, but people have come to an architect, so then you have to think and you have to convey the idea and use that idea to build the way. Okay, in our case, Biome builds. So we get clients, we are majorly working in the urban settings of Bangalore, and we have mostly interacted with middle-class clients and also people who are very engaged with the designs they want. Also, many of them hugely engaged with asking for ecological sensibilities. So there was this couple, Prashant and Pratibha, and they called their homes Manjala Kare, and they sent us a brief, a 40-page PPT. I'm not going to share all of it, but this is how they were looking at their own house. A personal, timeless abode with a character of its own that grows on you over time like A.R. Rahman's music. I suppose you don't like the music in the first go, but you start liking it. And then the Vastu, and then the budget, and other simplified things. Then they also send us a sketch of how this home has to connect to different stuffs. And then they send us a picture of the site. Note, do remember this picture of the site. And he has read Timeless Way of Building of Christopher Alexander, so he takes out the ideas from it and sketches it and sends it to us. And the kind of concepts he's liked in some of our projects, because we have a huge web presence through Flickr and our website, they pick up pictures. And so this is how we get, not everybody is like Prashant, that they would send us a 40-page PPT, but many would kind of be conversant with the kind of work we do. So now the architect goes to the site. And what does the architect see? He sees these rocks at the site and gets very fascinated. That's one of my colleagues, and then starts ideating around the rocks. The rocks and the trees are, the rocks are in the site, the trees are outside. And so the ideation begins. So this is the pre-design part. And discussions happen with clients, and where will the master bedroom be, where will the children's bedroom be, and how the rocks are driving the way the placements are happening. Then the plans happen. Now, like you said, Mandar, I agree with the fact that yes, for a long time we didn't have architects, or we didn't have design happening and or drawings happening before the construction was happening. But also, if you realize, there was a lot of time. We don't have time nowadays in our constructions. We have sometimes given 5 months to do a 10,000 square foot structure. And for that, the ideation with drawings, I feel, is essential. And also nowadays we have extreme tight budgets. So especially for biome, we have mostly clients of middle class. And when you have tight budgets and we don't have this unlimited budget, it's not a king, it's not a rich man, it's not a nobleman like in pre-Renaissance who's going to be building, but it is a common person who's taking a loan for 25 years with an EMI, and it starts as soon as he gets the first loan. So there is different timings. So it's very important that we ideate, we think, we make drawings before we start, as well as while we are designing and while we are construction. So drawings to me is very essential, and it's also important that in the process of designing, we educate the client to understand spaces. And for that, so we do more design. Okay, sorry, this is something which came up, and so we look at why we're looking at alternative in design. So we look at economic, ecological. Sometimes it's just a whim. I want something different, which would be somebody who's more like a mentor, who says, yeah, you can design something for us different, because we have the choice, we have the wherewithal that we can spend on something different. So this will be mostly a second house, but in most cases for biome, it's the first two, economical and ecological. So an alternative is available as another possible choice, and relating to activities that depart from or challenge the traditional norms. For us, the traditional norms are plastered, painted brick buildings or buildings with RCC. But here we are talking about building with earth. So now when we're building with earth, we need to be telling the client how it would look. So we use other forms of drawings. I don't draw like this, but we have younger colleagues who help us, and then still engage and show them what are the different ways of roofs we'll be doing before we really start. But at no time you notice that in this drawing, the architect is missing the rocks. Then further details happen. Details happen to the level of foundation. Most of the time, alternatives when we see walls and roofs. What we are missing is a big chunk of a design, which is also the foundation. And here, because it was a rocky land, we really didn't have to put a foundation which goes completely. We didn't have to use RCC, but we could use what we call a stub foundation, which would lower the cost of material, the amount of stone to be used, and also create a foundation which will be cheaper. But then for that, you have to talk to the structural engineers and develop the details and give this to the contractor. And similarly, like you saw in one of the earlier SketchUps, was that the kind of roof you will put, the kind of junctions you would do. So I'm mixing both the drawings needed as well as design and then the final structure. So this is the house. You still see the rocks. One rock is in the next plot. And you can still see the rock from here, and you can see the arch panel roofs. These are adobe bricks. Adobe are handmade, stabilized earth blocks. You know, we had to show the client that this is another possibility than stabilized earth blocks, which are made with the machine, pressed with the machine, and they liked the idea. Another view of the house. They brought some old windows, so mix and match. So we're going to the next project, which is ISKCON. This is in Galtere village, which is about 100 kilometers from Mumbai. The total land was 63 acres. We started with the first phase was 10,000 square meters of construction. Sorry, the first phase was 3,000. We have completed about 10,000 square meters. So, though this part didn't happen, we didn't, but the whole proposal was that you make a temple complex, a retreat, an Ayurvedic hospital, Goshala, and nursery. And the site location, the site itself, and studied the site through almost 8 months. We noticed many things. One is that there is a way the water is flowing in the land that is above the land. Then we did hydrogeological study and learned about how it flows below the land. Then through the safe bearing capacity studies, we studied as to where should we put the buildings so that they will have the least cost on foundation. And where should we put the buildings and road that it doesn't impede the water flow as well as it allows for agriculture to continue. Now we're adding more people into the plot, so they would require more water. So here we dug a large pond which allowed for water to be percolated. We have 2 wells in the land which get the water out, and that's how we looked at the whole water use. Now more people, more agriculture is a possibility because people will use water and the water will be full of nutrients. So a system for treating the wastewater was also put in place. I'm not talking much of all this, I'm only talking about making of the buildings later. So the whole ideation happens, we talk to the clients on where to place the building, and this is through phases. Even in future, it's been decided where you should place it. And so we did the foundation, it's stone, it's with stabilized mud mortar, and we coming from Bangalore who get stone which is granite stones, and we realized that we don't get bond stones in Maharashtra, and this being an earthquake-prone region, the structural engineer, Professor Yogananda, was insistent that the 2 edges of the foundation should be connected at different stages, and basalt stones come in these strange shapes, they don't come sized. Then we looked for, and we again found concrete short poles, and we used them as bond, not only across the foundation but also vertically. So vertically we have used stones, etc. Now the whole foundation is tied up, and it's with stabilized mud mortar, so mud and a bit of cement and cement is used for stabilization. Then further to this was that it's again earthquake prone and we needed ties. And so there are ties at sill levels also. Now these ties are, if we kept putting them at sill levels, it would take longer time for it to set before we can do the next course. So a certain block was derived, which is a U block. So you make this U block and put the steel in and put the concrete. Now we have saved the time of placing these blocks and placing the concrete and continue the work. As well as it saves us from plastering. So in some of the thinner walls, yes, the concrete stays there, but this is for toilets, so these anyways invariably get plastered. Then the whole design was done in modules. Note, about 15,000 square feet in the first phase was done in 8 months. 8 months of construction and then 3 months of finishing when it was raining. So arches were in modules. And these modules will be made, readied, and were used and done faster. Similarly, we used arch panel roofs, again made with earth. These were made precast, so they're made in the ground and lifted up and placed whenever and wherever needed. So a team is making blocks for walls, a team is making roofs, and a team is building. So yes, there are many people, but a lot of work is happening parallelly. So it's alternative, but it doesn't accept the fact that it will take longer in building with alternative. No, it can be made faster, but what it required was that we decide on details, on the drawings, much before the construction starts at the site and to the detail. Now, these are only masons at site. There are no qualified engineers or contractors at site. So how do you make a drawing? And it's important that you make a drawing. Luckily, these were the first group. The masons went from Bangalore because, you do a first project, you do it well. And that was very important for both the clients and us. So we made this drawing and large prints were given to the masons, and they would know how many rows do you make before you put a sill band or before you put a lintel band. And the heights they could check. So the heights will be right for the wooden frames to be fixed. So there's no gap and there's no filling up with something else. So everything was kind of preordained, pre-decided for this alternative way of construction to be faster. Otherwise, people get into the whole fact that, oh, let's do RCC, it will be faster, which is not so true. Here is the U block, and more of it made and kept. And similarly, detailed drawings for each stages, where the arch panel comes and meets, where the chhaja comes and meets, where the roof happens, where do you put a wall plate, was all available. So for me, again here, especially here, you're doing a project in Mumbai, you're doing it with masons alone, and we are in Bangalore. To be economical, it's good to make good drawings. This is the plan of one of the buildings. Even to clients, you give them what it would look like, and this is how it is. This is a picture taken about 10 years later, in a place where it rains 3,000 mm a year. Through the details of the roofs, the walls are beautiful, still not black, as you would find a lot of buildings in Mumbai. So I come to the last project, a project which is about 5 years old now, a school, kindergarten kind, and also daycare. This was the plot. You have a go down, you have an apartment under construction, a small access road, and the blue rectangle, almost of 100 feet by, I think it's 100.2 or something like that feet, which was given by Vastu to be used, and that alone to be used and built with. The important factor here were two things. One is the school followed a certain kind of philosophy of teaching, which is the Emilio Regia philosophy, which started in Italy after the Second World War, where it was the women of the towns, because there were less men after the war, decided that the city should be the teacher and not just a school where the kids go. So the schools were designed around piazzas and plazas and places which are for public, places which are for just the parent and the teacher and the child, and then children and the teacher. So this way the hierarchy of spaces happened. So we decided that since we had to do within a rectangle, we decided that let the spaces within in the classroom be organic, be something which are less definitive of a rectangle. And then we said, yeah, so the most banal thing is like, okay, studying under the tree, which is not what really our concept was. I like to put this picture because most students would like to show studying under a tree as something which is the concept of a school. But for us, the tree was a structural element. The dendiform, so it's useful in the concept of making the space. And we were also at the same time looking at fry auto structure. See, we have to do it very fast. This was just a 5 months project from the date the design started, when they signed up with us, to the date when we finished the work and give it to them. So we are also here insisting that teamwork is very important. When they started discussing, we started looking at what materials and who will be the contractor, and at the same time we are also costing. If all of these buildings we do have a cost, have an estimate told to the client before, and to be able to tell the client an estimate before, you need to have drawings. You need to have details. So while we are ideating, we are looking at different structural systems. So we thought, oh yeah, we'll look at tree-like forms because they can take a lot more area to take the load while they occupy lesser area below. So we did this, but we were always thinking of using the paper tubes as partitions, and this is how we designed. So if you see here, there's like plethora, there's huge number of columns everywhere. I think we had something like 16 columns or something in the whole design. Then we talked to our structural engineer, and he said, this is too much. He just made 8 columns. And he said how part of the facade could also take load. So the ideation started, what are the different ways of doing the foundation, how and where the foundation would be. Adding to it was where the columns would come, and then the roof. Everything figured out, where the lights will be there, skylights, how the walls will be designed. The column was quite complicated for our contractor. So in the office, we made 3Ds as well as a model of the column to show the contractor the joints. This was kept at the site so that they could keep looking at the joints, because they're on one structural column member, the spanning members join at 2 different places, on the surface and also in the corners. And this was very important that the contractor understood. And this is how the column and the space is used. The column is used in a very versatile way by the teachers. They don't just have a plain surface to put their stuff to, but there is a 3-dimensional space available for them. A lot of paper was used because it's softer, and also why not try something different when a chance is given. So this is how the whole building is. Now, one of the major discussion with the client was, your land is available to you just for 5 years. And he had the budget. He said 1.5 crores and nothing more. So you're going to spend 1.5 crores. after 5 years, you either leave it for the client, for whoever is there to use it, and most probably it will be used like another go down, or you have the choice to take everything apart and take it with you. He was quite excited by that. And so now we have tied ourselves into a bind, saying that now we have to make a building which is dismantleable. So we made this building in that sense. In fact, even except for the concrete footing of the steel columns, everything from the foundation too could be removed. We are very lucky that in Bangalore we get stone slabs. So the foundation, what's written is stone slabs to retain the earth inside and not allow the water to go out. And the external facade is steel, aluminium, wood, and a bit of earth blocks. The columns can be removed completely or can be taken apart and used. Paper can go back to earth or you can reuse it. False ceiling is with bamboo ply, which came from Assam, and the roof is a GI roof. Partition walls, some of them are made with earth blocks. The earth blocks were sourced from another plot where we were making earth block home, and we had a lot of earth blocks available. We had a lot of earth available, and the contractor being the same, he made extra blocks at that place. This is how the building looks. And this is the way it is inside. So now the flooring is, to us, the choice came, what flooring do we use? And note that we have limited budget. So what we did was we used paver blocks for the flooring. Paver blocks placed on quarry dust. So now not only can you remove this flooring and go, but also the quarry dust below. And surely in 5 years' time, the quarry dust costs twice the amount they paid for. Paper used extensively even for furniture. Another view. And interesting designs also happen because of vastu constraints. So one side has to be, the whole roof had to slope from south to north. And when you're sloping for 100 feet, well, there is quite a bit of height which you get on one of the sides, which is at the south. And so we have mezzanines for the kids, and it's a good place for fun, and the interconnection between classrooms happen at different heights. More of the same space. So I'm ending with a drawing which I found most recently of ours. This is design of a water tank. And this was done, I forget the date, but I think 2003 or so. No, this is 96. So this is a water tank, and most happily this year we went back to this place, which is about 100 kilometers from Bangalore, and the water tank is still there. So interesting thing was that in 96, when we were making this space, we had no electricity. So the whole design had to work with, there will be no welding happening. And how will you now make this space? And this water tank, plus there is a small temple made. So the lower level is a water tank to hold the water for agriculture purpose. Okay, this is one of the first structures which has a solar photovoltaic. That's what you see on top of the tank. And so the solar photovoltaic pump was in place. So it would take the water, there's a small river flowing next to it, the water from the river to the underground tank to be used for agriculture purpose. And that's why you have these stone steps which cantilever out of the wall, and there is no railing to it. And you go up, you have a machan and a tank again, which supplies water to the little building which is on the side. But this too couldn't have been done sitting at the site and ideating. We had to do this drawing, we had to decide on what will be the height of the whole tank, how will we go in it, how will we reach above, how will we work it, where will we put the photovoltaic, etc. So drawings are essential. But these are the kind of stuffs which we could make without drawings. And we can never match this. Thank you. So what is the current convention norm in construction? Which is mostly burnt brick, plaster painted, solid concrete block, again plaster painted, or RCC frame structure, hollow concrete block, again plaster painted. And what's common in all of this is plaster and paint, or in some cases a cladding. So what does this say? It just says that it's a cover-up job, covering up handwork, which is mostly bad, but also catering to the dominant narrative, which expects a painted building. Can you make a building different? And that's why use alternatives which will shun plaster and paint. And why? Because construction done at that time, if you're not going to be covering up, is mindful and aesthetic. It upskills people. So I come up with an anecdote of a certain client of ours wanted a certain mason to do his work or a certain kind of work, and we gave numbers of 2 masons. He calls up one and he says, "Oh, I'm in Germany." So Anupma Kundu had taken him to Germany for certain work. He's from Auroville. And when he calls up the other mason, he says, "I am in US." So the client calls back and says, "What kind of masons are you giving us? These 2 are abroad." I said, "Yeah, because they are so skilled that they need it everywhere." But the second mason, our favorite, had gone because his daughter had studied computer engineering and is working in US. So it upskills not just the person, it upskills the family. And construction industry in that way is one of the very good industry. It upskills without having to go to a college. And it's also, in most cases, cheaper in the beginning and cheaper in maintenance. And most importantly, it's ecological. Thank you. Do I do that?
Let me respond. I'll come to my curatorial note eventually, but I'll take up some questions. But before that, let me first respond, ma'am. Firstly, huge thanks for including the school project, because I believe that school project actually, in a way, communicates the whole ethos of what the whole synopsis of your presentation is. The point that we are wanting to make. Why alternative, and why are people not looking forward for these kind of interventions across, and why should alternative be looked at in a certain kind of a frame alone? So I'll expand more on that. I have written a lot of notes. I was writing as you were discussing, and whatever was coming to the mind. But I'm very happy that we chose the school project, and the discussion about the tank also not to have the railing. So very interesting memories that I'll have talking to you about it, that this does not have a railing. What does that mean? So even 20 years down the line, they don't have the railing. I'm saying,
Sorry?
even after, I think 30 years now, 96 and 25 years, they haven't put the railing there. So they are probably happy with the design. And yeah, so whatever was not done, because there was no facilitation of that kind of a space there, no electricity, so no welding. But the design was worked out in such a way that it didn't hamper that particular element not being there. That's why it has been accepted till now, and it is still going in the same way. And that is the beauty of design.
Yeah.
So I will make my thesis. I'll tell you what is my hypothesis, but I'll also first open channels for questions. And then we also have architect Amit Arya, who has been with us for the first session, who was talking about representation and was talking about communication of the intent of the design to the other side of the story. So we'll also involve him. We will take him in eventually. So to begin with, madam, let's open the channel with our students.
Yes.
Students are looking forward to have an interaction with you. Currently, they're just entering in by identifying what is their first-hand kind of a take. They have loved the presentation. They're saying it's a lot to soak in and learn. Sure, I'm sure even the faculties who are here, architects and non-architects who have also joined, I'm sure each one of us are probably going inward and taking some time to soak it all in.
I'm sorry if it's too fast, but I think it's enough.
I think it was perfect. I think it was perfect. I may be wrong, because it's depends on actually every individual, and mostly the students, if they are able to take it in and at least absorb, I think the message is conveyed within them. That is the page should convey the message, and I believe it has done. Amit has opened his end. He's saying very humbling
Oh,
present.
I can see the chats.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been doing so many of these now, but because we do it,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
in different places, so we have to do this Google Meet quite a bit.
Right. I will ask you to entertain this question. Maybe you decide when to appropriate the question. My question would be that if we look at alternative technologies, let's not use the word alternative, but I'll come to it later. But I'm saying for the time being, let's say if alternative technology has to embrace the idea of virtual environment, how would probably what kind of areas can it look at, and how can it better itself? This can probably come eventually when you feel maybe you can open it up. Even
Yeah,
Amit can opine on that eventually when we enter.
yeah. So I would also like to know what do you do, well, how do you define virtual environment?
I'll introduce Amit in this. Amit can probably open his end.
Hmm.
So can we have Amit Arya, architect Amit? Can we have you here with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, really loved it. Very humbling. I don't know if I'm the appropriate person to answer the question because the question is for you. But you asked, how do you define the virtual? Well, maybe Mandar, I'll ask you the question back as to, are you talking about this whole process and the technology that Chitra showed being applied to where we are going forward? Is that what you mean by virtual, or?
What I mean is the space of when, because we haven't designed the operational part of the project, let's say for example, and we're just entertaining this idea of what could be done. So that's where I was going to place my thesis. Actually, my hypothesis was, I'll probably introduce it now. My hypothesis was actually trying to look at design as a scientific process. So it's a scientific approach basically. So rather than calling it with the tag of smart design or intelligent design or alternative technology, rather than getting into all these jargons, just to simply look at the idea that it is a scientific approach. So wherever it is relevant, wherever it is possible to create or recreate what is probably going to happen, we will be in a better position to control it now. So I think even the idea of augmented reality, where the client will probably get to feel how the space is going to work tomorrow, even though before it has been built, and the decisions of articulating scientifically what could probably happen, where Chitra showed this idea of the foundation being a different approach. So there, the fundamental of tying up was rather looked at, rather than going with the most standard way of let's put some framing material and get over with it. So the question of tying was looked at very intelligently, I feel. And that's why I'm saying it's science basically. So you're looking at it in a very pragmatic way and trying to resolve it with whatever is your means and that point of time, and testing it also if it really works. Maybe the budget and all will eventually matter, but to begin with, at least to start off with a choice, I think the choice of having the fundamental idea of placing the theory that we need to look at the time. Can it be done in a different way than what it is generally done? And how good will it be? So I think that is what I'm trying to say. So because we have found that people who are dealing largely with this kind of technology, on one hand, which is handcrafted technology, are probably a little bit shy to embrace the idea of virtual technology and explore what is the dimension that it can add up into bettering that space as an accepting space for people. So that was the premise.
Yeah. In fact, we love technology, and I think that's very important. Because for us, what's been very important is that we don't want to work with without putting a cost to the kind of design investments. It makes our buildings. And for the estimates to happen, we have to really imagine it early on. That's what we showed. In fact, we are looking at the VR capability in the office now, and it's just that this pandemic, we've not been able to develop it. We're looking at working with it. It's important to show the clients early on what it would look like and to be within it. So yes, we embrace technology quite fast. We were one of the first architects who had a website in India. So besides that, besides beating my drum, I'm just saying that it's important to go with technology. And where we only kind of closeting the digital technology as technology. Everything is a technology. So when we're looking at foundation in a specific space, making it is a technology, and that could also be done only through science. If you don't know the SBC, the safe capacity of the soil, you have to get it right. Then you're doing some tukkabaji and something with the mestri and his what is comfortable to him, and that's what you're adopting. But with understanding and through science, through structural design done properly, you would save huge amount of cost, and more than cost is the material used. And that's for us the most important part of design is that the material used should be just the right amount and nothing extra.
Yeah, it has to be critical. Exactly. It has to be measured, and it should also be later on. You can also calculate and tell that whatever was outlined has also been achieved.
Yeah,
Measurable in all ways.
estimate.
True, true.
So that, and when you do the billing, you get the correct correlation of it.
Yeah. So Amit, how do you want to look at this? I was looking at the idea of in India we had Tata Nano, and it didn't turn up the way probably it was expected to have the kind of turnover and acceptance. It was marketed as affordable solution for cars for them who don't afford the standard available. So it was an alternative in the Indian market for cars. But people unfortunately fell into this trap of the image that it carries. And I'll also connect it to this thing also happened with the great architect Laurie Baker, where people said that he's the architect for the poor people. So why should we engage or commission him? Very unfortunate, but then this is the idea of how society works in the time of image. And but when we go back, when we look at 300, 400 years before, we see that largely even palaces, homes of poor people, palaces use the same material. The craftsmen were the same people who were making a home for a king and also making the home for a poor man in the village or in the town. And we had that kind of coherence in design. And today we have this kind of a dissonance which is happening all over the place. But it is also an opportunity that people are getting a chance to choose whatever is relevant. So in that, I was trying to position this idea of scientific architecture, because technology is not outside the domain of science. Neither is creativity, I believe. And spirituality is also in the dimension of science to an extent, not entirely, but to an extent. Of course, because there is a way to approach these particular areas, albeit not completely known to mankind, but there are ways in which we approach them. There are some structures and there are some orders in which we do so. So in this particular idea of an atmosphere of creating this divide, that अगर ये type का घर करेंगे तो it gives a very poor image, और ये type का घर करेंगे तो it gives a very luxurious, opulent image. And I want people to know that I am earning a lot. So there are these divisions in society. So as professionals, how should we look at it? Should we keep this going or should we inform it in our own ways? So one of the examples is what Chitra madam just showed us. But I would like to just hear for the profession at large and for our students.
Well, the first thing was that you touched about was Tata Nano. Well, I'm not an expert on why it failed, to be honest, but my general assumption is to a certain extent it was based on the idea of image. But on the other hand, I also read an article somewhere that the kind of target audience that they were looking for had a house slightly bigger than the Nano itself. When you talk about buying a car which is somewhere between 80,000 rupees to 1.2 lakhs, I mean, I think somewhere the product positioning must have been a big challenge for them. Not to mention all the political loopholes through which the production was set up. And it's not your only example where they've tried to produce something fantastic. There have been examples during, I would say it was our Bauhaus moment, you could say that. It was an attempt at a Bauhaus moment to a certain extent. And if anything, you can look at Gropius's entire career, and there is a lot of trial and error that's required. You can't have a one-off solution. So I think we should attempt at a lot more Tata Nano based ethics all over.
Can I intervene?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So to me, the Tata Nano was really not what the people like Amit says, who had a house which was equivalent to the size of Tata Nano, wanted. In fact, if you notice, they want a larger car. And in fact, then if you go to the slums, you would find more of the pickup truck-like things, to take in more people with them. So it will be a mystery who will have a car, but he would like to take 4 or 5 people. So it will be with a back which is empty, where maybe 10 people can sit. He can take material, he can take many things. They're not really needing a vehicle to go from one place to another. They would prefer a motorbike to go to one place to another because it will be faster than a car. So the Tata Nano should have been for students and especially for women. And if you notice, a lot of women are the ones who bought that, not really men.
Yeah, it confirms.
Yeah,
It confirms his point, Amit's point.
quite like the Austin Morris, which was mostly women in England who bought and used. And so they didn't make it, I suppose, good looking enough for women to also use it. And it's the tragedy of, let's make it something small, like the way Indira Awas and whatever other Awas which happens, make it small, ugly, and expect the poor people to accept it. And not
Yeah,
look at the needs of the poor people, which is in fact a larger car, a larger open space, etc.
so same is the case with the house, where the government is dishing out, as you rightly said, that the house it's an alternative approach to architecture. It is cost effective. It is for the poor, which also is shutting off all the other scopes and beautiful intelligent ideas and space of intelligence that is operated in these projects to come to the common man largely. In a way, one of our students is also raising a very interesting point here. The student goes on to connecting the fundamentals of the practice. Biome talks about social responsibility in a certain way, looking at the ecosystem and community. So the student wants to know what are your thoughts about the responsibility of an architect, a social responsibility of an architect, from the position that you see the community.
Now, that's a very interesting question. I would really like to first thing say that the architect is no diva. So first of all, let's just stop saying that, just that architect made the building. The architecture is a hugely collaborative process. And for that, you have to make teams. So you might be hearing of Zaha Hadid, but if you don't listen or learn from Peter Schumacher, it doesn't happen complete.
Right.
The science and everything which comes from him and the kind of other people who are working in the place is something which makes the team. That's what the project happens. And Zaha never, at no point said, it's I who did it, it's the office which did it. So similarly, it's very important that the architect recognizes and works with the team. And the team is not only of architects, it's a team of everybody who's working there. So for us, yes, I cannot take the whole world, not the 1.3 billion also in India, but I would rather look at least the 500 people who are with us. Whether each one of them has a job, has some kind of more, that they have proper place to stay, etc. So we keep looking at it and we keep seeing that we have about 7 to 8 teams who've been working with us for past 30 years, that all of them have jobs, which makes it very tough for us. We can't only take large projects which have huge time lags for work to happen, or they are away from Bangalore, but we have to take a lot of small homes within Bangalore so that all these small contractors have jobs. So these are kind of conversations and empathy which the architect has to develop and work with. And all the time you may not like the kind of house the client wants, but at the back of it is that this will give a job to this team. So this is our social responsibility. Then working on water and sanitation is the next bit, which I didn't talk about here.
Yeah. So I guess looking at a question from one of our faculties talking about what could be the significant contribution of biome largely in the domain of alternative practices. I think from what you spoke about, and also if you want to add something more to just elaborate that point, I think every practice has its own beliefs and ways of probably looking at things in not always in a methodical way. Maybe it can just be your beliefs. So maybe if you can answer from that point of view, what makes biome different from other similar practices?
And it's very methodical way of thinking, so it's not only beliefs.
Right.
So what happened was that when we were building our house, this is the basement of our house where I'm sitting in, that we found that we would get the best earth to build with, and we built our house with it, and we made this basement because we knew that earth from the foundation is not enough to make a house. So, and while we were making, we also built another house nearby. But the house became a place, a lab for ideas. And this is where my husband found that, oh, it's raining, and if we connect the water, how much water we would get. But at the same time, we are also reading and understanding the various crises the city is facing. And the crisis which it was facing largely was of water. We were building in suburbs, and again, water was an issue. It's both quality and quantity of water because the water services wouldn't reach there. And when it comes to water, along with it, even sanitation was the issue. Somehow the energy reaches, somehow the electricity reaches there. The Karnataka Electricity Board puts up electricity, but water is difficult. And the people had to buy those lands because they were cheaper. Within the city, the land availability and the cost was making people go to the suburbs. So instead of kind of saying, oh, suburbs are not right, suburbs became the place where we could implement our ideas. So working on water became very important. Rainwater harvesting, treating the wastewater for reuse, etc., was part of the design itself. That's how the name BOOM came, because you're designing for an ecosystem. Then further to it is looking at alternative energy, looking at also agriculture within the scope of designing your building. How do you grow food? Is it possible from your own waste? So our terrace, we grow rice and ragi, and if there are a whole lot of things happening on the terrace. But it's the only place where you get light sunlight in a small plot. So there we treat our wastewater. And we have dry climate, so we use our waste as human waste as human. So these have been tried in different places and with different clients as long as it gels with their ideas. But wastewater and rainwater is something now people don't even ask. That is something different. They want it, or they accept, and they expect biome to be given. But beyond this biome water, this is the other vertical in our group, works on water in government schools, on water issues and sanitation issues in villages. We try, which is working with an NGO in Kerala on, again, water issues, agriculture issues, use of wastewater in agriculture. But it's all by serendipity and by learning from observing. And this is one important factor which we should always teach our students is the observation skill. Observing and then documenting and then looking at more. There is a vertical which is an architecture, which is working in a lot more commercially, but there is also water, which works with as an NGO, and that's a trust which works on community levels. Community level projects with the architecture group does is mostly on designing of play spaces for children with disabilities. So that's a different story. But we do.
Yeah. I would just try to take leaf from what you were saying and trying to blend the questions also that some of the students are posting. If you have to further the idea of the practice, the significant idea of having a very methodical approach, let's look at this idea that also trying to connect to your professional experience. As a method, if we had to choose a team of masons for let's say for a wall of stones, for example, to build with stone, a certain kind of stone, how do we go about that? What kind of choices do we have to understand the design of the wall through drawing, the design of the wall through making, because the masons have a certain skill which is beyond the idea of drawing. They know certain things because they have been making it for thousands of years. So one is making, and where does this drawing stops, the making can enter in, and where both these stop, maybe technology also enters in and says that, boss, these two things are not giving you enough answers, let me also add up something. So we get a lot of iterations happening, new wall combinations or new bonds are formed. So the idea of rat trap bond came from Laurie Baker's ways of trying to understand how would he create a barrier, and also at the same time insects coming in, the rats coming in, and climatic barrier as well. So he transcended the idea of this simple bond to a very functional, purposeful kind of an idea. So how does the practice look at this as a method? How to choose the team, use the drawing, use the team at best to decide where the drawing stops, and how can craft help, and finally how does technical craft help, technology helps. So maybe Amit also can add into it once Madam is done.
Okay. This is a lot of things in one question. So first thing which I must say is that Baker didn't invent rat trap bond. Rat trap bond is there in Mackay much before Baker came. I don't know when was Mackay, but Mackay has that. Because the first thing, one of our first constructions were by rat trap bond, and I'd never seen what Baker has been doing. Though my parents settled in Kerala, I'd never been to Kerala. Maximum I've ever stayed is 3 months, and I'd never seen Baker's construction. I had to learn it from Mackay to adopt it here in Bangalore. So it was there.
Right.
So what in terms of a very important factor when you're using these materials is, or any material, is that you have to know construction. When you see stone, you have to think of how will you construct with it. Yes, you have to know from what the masons are doing. That's one part. Either you replicate what the masons are doing, which is fine. It's nothing wrong about it. But if you think anything new, you will have to be at the site and make. And once you've made it, you have to put it into the drawing so that you can use it later. And once you put it into the drawing, then you can do it better. But surely you could use AI and VR for making of these two, because you can also work at joints without having to have the stones and mortar there in front of you. You can work at these joints and create this whole space, whether it's like Peter Rich, those walls in that in South Africa. But you can do that because you know that you can create these various kinds of stone, basalt, and you can create, say, about thousands of them, and how are you going to put everything together, and you can view it and you can work at it. So, because even that's what the people at Teha did in Venice Biennale,
Right.
they made it
Yes.
before they put it up. So it can be done. And that's where you should use technology, because then you'll use lesser material.
True, there is lesser wastage. That's an
Yeah.
important observation. Yeah.
In that vault, you have a thinner brick at the top because there's the load is lower. So you can design units. So there are different ways depending upon where you really want to use and when it happens, and what would be cheaper or what's the budget. There's a whole lot of mix which comes in.
Lot of mix, yeah. And by experience, you can make that choice.
Yes.
So lastly, you're saying we have to engage with the activity.
I thought Amit also had something.
Yes, Amit. Yeah, Amit, if you can open.
I think the other spectrum of technology that I agree with Chitra, and to a large extent, the other spectrum of technology is about wastage, which the kind of direction from where I'm looking at technology is very adaptable. Like, let's say when we do tall towers in New York City and stuff like that. Nowadays, you've got quantitative tools which can preempt, even before anything has been sent out to any of the factories, the exact quantifiable material that you require, and brings it down to accuracy levels that we've never known before.
Yeah.
And in a certain way, in a completely different way. Now, of course, it's up to debate whether when you're still using aluminium, is it green or not? But let's say if you had to, then at that level, how much do you use it? And what's the best way of scripting your project management in a way that you can really bring down the number? So technology is definitely working on that front hugely. There's also a lot of investment in artificially fabricated material, which in a lot of ways, in some parts of the world, you look at using stone as to an advantage, and in some parts you don't. Like, it also depends upon which part of the world you're talking about. procuring stone, working with stone itself is such a, in those parts of the world, the place where I'm at least practicing from, is a very high intense effort. I mean, your footprint becomes crazy. Green footprint, I mean, just goes for a toss. You may claim to be a very green, efficient building, but it doesn't turn out to be like that. So in that context, is there any investigation that's happening? And are there other strategies of materials that you could use that sort of collapses that challenge? Is I would say a very relevant way of looking at technology. It's from a different standpoint.
I must intervene, I must bring in one bit. So in other cities, we are demolishing a lot because our bylaws keep changing. So the FARs keep changing, FSI, and so the buildings get demolished and we create so much debris. So we are now putting into place where we reuse the debris into making the walls again. And they're also still load-bearing walls. And there are people now who take debris, only thing that they need more land, crush it and make earth blocks and sell. So now earth block, which was earlier to be made at the site, is now available to buy. And people are happily buying, and instead of concrete blocks, are using that. And but beauty is that they're using debris to make the blocks. So technology, it's only focus on digital technology as technology. Like what Amit says, we also have a whole idea of how much resources we have in the world, how much of iron ore is available or how much of bauxite is available. We have that data. So we also know which material we should prefer now to use. So as such, we have about enough iron ore for 300 years. So let's look at steel. Let's combine steel and earth rather than build with, say, stone.
Yeah, these
So opportunities are there. For
right.
that, science is important.
These choices that you're talking about, both of you, are actually also trying to understand that we have a responsibility for the next generation as well. We can't use up and exhaust everything that we have. Tomorrow they will question, if you have used everything, what are we left with? So I think it is relevant in the way whatever we are doing to also keep in mind that tomorrow we are giving something back to the very Mother Earth, that from where we borrowed things from. So Ritika, I was asking this question. I think you have already answered that question. After the lifespan of the structure, how can we give back to the building, to the Mother Earth? Sorry. And there's one more very interesting question, which is very specific to the context where biome is located. It talks about, and Nishant is asking, one of our students, is if you have water scarcity in Bangalore, which is worldwide, people know that. How does this kind of construction and architecture address this problem, and what kind of construction is biome already entertaining?
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, so it's very good question. We use less water in construction compared to normal construction because one thing, Nishant, we don't plaster. Plaster takes a lot of water for curing. So that's one is greatly avoided. And when you're using arch panels, let's say, the curing is very little and you can start construction above it immediately. Whereas when you're using other constructions, you can't start both. We can start not only above, we can even do the finishing below. So that way, yes, it uses lesser water. But that's one bit. Construction water. More of it is important that in the design, you catch water where it falls and let it not go waste. So rainwater harvesting becomes very important for reuse, for use for living. So in fact, rainwater harvesting makes the house, the home, or the structure live. Then you don't waste water. So you reuse your wastewater. In Bangalore, there is an apartment which treats its sewage water to the degree that they use it for drinking. Because otherwise they have to go about 1,300 feet deep and they don't get good water. And that's what even Singapore uses. The new water in Singapore is treated wastewater. I'll show you the bottle. Sorry, that was the, if you can see, this is new water from Singapore, which is the water treated to the level that you can drink. And Lee Kuan Yew used to advertise that you can drink this water. So these are the ways where we talk about not just the construction, but we talk about making an ecosystem. You're not only making a space, which is there in my speech earlier, that's obsolete. It all makes sense. How do we make ecosystems? Because we are really killing ecosystems by our construction.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. It's not only about one thing when you're looking at water with respect to construction. It's actually about sustaining life and making the building meaningful eventually in the times to come as part of the ecosystem. Nicely put. I would like to invite now for concluding remarks. Let's have Professor Anand Achari, our principal as well. Anand sir, if you can join us.
Uh, it was a fabulous presentation by both the eminent speakers. It's always touching to hear Chitra madam here and motivating students and showing the way forward for what the country needs to go, looking at alternatives. Uh, and also parallelly looking hearing out architect Amit, where he's talking about that making the students the basic awareness what student needs to hear about the jugalbandi which he talked about between the plans, sections, elevations, axo, and not only restricting to one point of working, which normally many times students get stuck up with, and resolving the at plan level, and also looking at latest digital technology where he is talking about how atmospheric digital rendering has come into the picture. So a interesting take here was how it's not about what high tech or low tech is, but what appropriate technology is in today's context. And This is where we talk about the sustenance and sustainability comes into the picture, where we need to understand the appropriateness of that particular technology in the particular relevance whichever you are trying to address. If it is not, it will not address the core issue what the society intends to. So with that, I would like to conclude the this webinar day 2 of the second series of webinar, and I thank both the speakers for this fantastic presentation and the debate and discussions, and the students, hope the students, I'm sure the students would have got motivated to work in the upcoming studios where they need to understand the importance of both alternate and the technology, and the representations, importance of communicating through the use of this representation techniques. And I thank the entire VES management, trustees, Sri Malkani sir, and our managing trustee, Sri Bulani sir, our president, and Sri Amarasrani sir, our secretary, for giving this opportunity to conduct this webinar series for the students for architecture. And also I thank the entire team, whether it is a small task or a large task, it is not possible by an individual without the help of a great teamwork. And right from Professor Mandar to Professor Kiran to Professor Ajit, Professor Abhijit, Professor Monica, all these things have put down a great effort to get this thing. Professor Pulkit, beautiful graphics have been worked out with him. So I thank the entire team for making this successful webinar series too. And we look forward for both the speakers. We would look forward for your involvement probably in the upcoming studios, where probably we might look at some interactive studios where the students are working, and they are trying to hands-on with whatever they are trying to work in.
You
And
should also
I
click a
thank all the
photograph.
students for both the days. They were extensively patient. We have extended both the days beyond the time, and I thank the students for that. and hope this has been an enriching both 2 days with you. With that, I conclude the webinar.